Welcome back. I hope that you can hear me. If you could nod your heads if you can, at least a couple of you. Thank you. Thanks a lot. I want to welcome you to the first session on the Fair and Resilient Food Systems track on the day 2 of the Next Bite 2024. Unwrapped, consumer perceptions of cultured meat and precision fermentation. We have with us a head of insights at Consumer Observatory, Dirk Bosma, and the industry manager at Euromonitor International, Mr. Tom Rees. We're very glad to have them here. Let's welcome them on stage, and we're all ears.
Going to start off with a little clip, a little video to introduce not myself, but EIT Foods Consumer Observatory.
Consumers are at the center of our food system. They are the driving force behind food trends and have a unique power to influence the way we produce, manufacture, package, and regulate our food. But how much do we really know about what consumers buy and why? Powered by EIT Food and made up of a consortium of experts, the Consumer Observatory is dedicated to uncovering consumer attitudes and opinions on agri-food topics. By producing bespoke consumer insights, collating knowledge and analyzing consumer food trends, the Consumer Observatory is on a mission to put consumers at the heart of all food systems decision-making. Do you want to stay ahead of the curve?
The food transition is, in essence, a change in consumer behavior, because we know quite well what a healthy and sustainable diet is. And we have most of the technologies and the products to feed the world in a healthy and sustainable way. But what we need is consumers to make more sustainable food choices. EIT Food has acknowledged the importance of understanding consumers. And as I am speaking and looking at the other stages, on that stage my colleague Eva is talking about consumer perceptions of regenerative agriculture. And on that stage my colleague Klaus is speaking about trust of consumers in the food system. Whenever new technologies are being introduced, it's very important to be very aware of who's going to adopt these technologies, particularly if these technologies can be a bit scary and that consumer acceptance is not a given. Consumer acceptance needs to be earned for these new technologies. And in general, we know that European consumers, they don't have a high level of trust in the food system, and they're not very open to innovations, particularly high-tech innovations. I'm going to show you some results from our Trust Tracker study that we asked people, would you try any of these products? And today I'm going to be talking about these products, precision fermented dairy products and cultivated meat. I'm going to refer to them as biotech foods. And you see that there is a proportion of Europeans open to trying these foods. There's also a very big proportion not open to trying these foods. And any of the foods that we use or that we ask people about their openness, there is quite a big chunk of Europeans who would not try these foods. So consumer acceptance is not a given, it needs to be earned, and it needs to be transferred to consumer preference. Trust Tracker results are coming up. It's the big European study on consumer trust. Scan this code and you will be taken to a website where you'll be the first to receive these results, coming out in 1 or 2 months. Today we're going to be talking about biotech foods, and the insights that we have can help the industry to launch the product, because decisions need to be made. We need to understand who will be the first to buy into this new technology. We need to understand what story, what messages will be most appealing for these early adopters and innovators. I will be presenting outcomes of a large-scale qualitative study. We spoke to about 100 European consumers from all over Europe about their perception of these new technologies. Tom here is going to present quantitative results, particularly about who these people are. And we need to understand why these people would be buying into these new technologies. And this doesn't work. So we need to do this the low-tech way. Because basically the promise of these biotech products is that it is something that is without animal harm, something that is healthy, something that has a small climate footprint, and something that is really tasty. Now there was supposed to be a poll coming up here. It's not showing, so we're going to do this by hand. So who do you think, who thinks that consumers would buy into these new technologies because of animal welfare? Just raise your hands. There's more than one answer possible. Okay. Who do you think buys into these products because of a lower climate footprint? Some hands. Yes. And who thinks that they would buy these products for health reasons? And who thinks they would buy into these products for sensory reasons, so because of the taste and the texture? Couple of hands. Okay, I'm going to show you who's right in a couple of minutes. One by one, I'll start off with animal welfare, and that is like the most obvious one. And I'm going to compare the biotech products, or the perception of the biotech foods, with the traditional animal-based food that they will substitute. And for animal welfare, it's quite easy. Consumers do not really have an issue with us killing animals for food, but it is the lives that these animals have that is a cause for disconcern. So consumers like to see this picture, happy cows in flowery meadows. They don't like to see these kind of pictures, animals that are maltreated for food. But consumers also like to block out this information. There's we don't like to see this information, so we close ourselves off for this information. But animal welfare is a reason for buying biotech foods, but it's not a big motivator. So this one was easy. The next one, the climate footprint. And here, once again, we compare the perception of the climate footprint of the conventional meat industry and the dairy industry versus the new ways of producing. And here we find a very interesting phenomenon, because if I was to ask this crowd whether or not we should reduce the intake of animal-based products because of climate reasons, most of you would raise their hands. But if you ask the consumers on the streets, they wouldn't be so sure, because they think that we've always produced food in this way. It's a natural way of producing food, so it can't really be harmful for the planet. So consumers, they are uncertain. And when it comes to the perception of the new technology, they would think, okay, it's artificial. We need to build large facilities for that. What is going to be the climate footprint of that? Is an example of how a certain consumer thinks about the footprint of the conventional way of producing. It's a negligible impact on the environment. So consumers, they are not convinced that we need to reduce our animal-based products. So here we have question marks. We don't know. Consumers really don't know how to scale this new way of production versus conventional. But then up next, health. And health, we see something similar. Consumers don't consider animal-based products like really unhealthy. Dairy and cheese are considered reasonably healthy. And here, chicken, fish, it is considered a healthy source of protein. They do have an issue with red meat. They don't know exactly why, but there's sort of this notion that red meat is not really healthy for you. But most consumers consider meat and other animal products to be reasonably healthy because they are a natural product. And now we all know that the way food is produced is not very natural at all, but consumers still have this idea that it is natural. And then you produce something in a lab, there are pretty serious concerns about safety. So first of all, you need to convince consumers that it's safe so that they don't get sick when they eat it. Next step is convincing them that it's healthy so that it's actually good for them, and we're not there yet. One thing about meat production that is a bit of a concern, that is feeding hormones, feeding antibiotics to animals. That is something that consumers are worried about, and they do see that this new way of producing food can be done without any of these harmful substances being added to the food. But in general, it is considered something ultra processed, and consumers sort of have a suspicion that during this process stuff will be added to the products that are really not good for them. So when it comes to health, not really a concern on the animal side of production, big concerns on the biotech ways of producing. And then lastly, the sensory qualities. Do they expect that these products will be like really tasty, have the right texture? And here, consumers are very skeptical. And if I speak to experts in the field, they often portray a picture of the market introduction being an introduction of a premium product. So something that is more expensive, but also very tasty and prepared by chefs in restaurants. And that potential way of introducing these products to the market is very far from current consumer perceptions, because current consumer perceptions are that these new products are imitations. They are produced in a way that does not mimic, that does not reflect the old-fashioned traditional way, and it's going to be very difficult to replicate the taste of meat and other animal products. This is how they think about this product, and it's this is how the industry, which consists largely of people in lab coats, have communicated about this product. So it feels like a medical innovation than real tasty food. And the current perception is that it will be it better fits, let's say, the lower quality meats, like sausages or minced meat, but definitely not a replacement for a steak. Another option that the industry is thinking about is to replicate like very exclusive meats, like a quail or venison, or animals that are rare or very expensive. And that requires a huge shift in perception from consumers, because they think, okay, it might be something that tastes like your average hamburger, but producing quail, no, definitely not. So too high hopes on taste and structure. This is how the average consumer thinks about what these new products will look like. So then, this is, at the moment, how consumers rank these biotech products versus the current products. And this is not a very positive picture, I admit. And I'm not saying that these products cannot be successful, but I would like to point out that the industry really has not only a technical challenge in actually producing the products, but it has a communication challenge. There is an image of something that will not be healthy, not be tasty, and that image needs to be torn down, and it needs to be replaced by something that is healthy and appealing. And having that said, some recommendations, Tom will have some more about how to produce these or how to promote these products. First of all, happy animals. That's what people want to see, and this is what this new industry can deliver. And we need proof. Consumers need proof that it is really really safe. It is really healthy, and it does have a reduced footprint. And here we need to have like very factual comparisons versus the products it replaces. Sell the sizzle. We don't want any more of these images of Petri dishes. We want images of real tasty products. So sell the sizzle. This premium route, for now, it's going to be very difficult. So don't go premium until you have actual proof that the products that you make actually are like really good and really tasty. And lastly, keep connecting to the consumer. This is the state of affairs right now. This is how consumers think at this very moment. This can change, this will change over time, and what is needed is a constant connection with the consumer, a constant testing, iterating, retesting, etc., until you get this message right. And with that, I'm going to give the word to Tom. Thank you.
Thanks, Dirk.
There you go.
Just to check, can everyone hear me? Use the microphone? Great. Okay. So my name's Tom Rees, and I'm from Euromonitor International. Today I'm going to be taking you through some of the key results from our health and nutrition survey, which we field annually of about 20,000 people. And for the last couple of years, we've been asking about people's likelihood and readiness to eat cell-cultivated meat and precision dairy, those kinds of foods. Now, when, of course, you're asking these questions, you have to strike a balance. You have to strike a balance between giving enough information in the question itself so that people can answer it in an informed way, but also not biasing the responses. So I wanted today to show you the exact text of the question that we asked, which is, it is now possible to create food by taking cells from a living animal or from a crop, then growing these cells into food using bioreactors, fermenters. It is possible to do this for meat, seafood, milk, other dairy products such as cheese, and even eggs and chocolate. Would you eat these foods? And you can see that globally, 26% of people say they would eat meat produced in this way. It's not the highest response. The highest response is 30%, saying that they wouldn't eat any of these foods produced this way. But meat is the highest food response. Just inching out dairy, there's a couple of 0.2 percentage points between the two. So we can see that there are 26% of people who we can call the potential early adopters. If you look at the regional picture, it's actually people in the Asia-Pacific region and MEA that are the most likely to respond positively here. And reflecting on what Dirk said earlier, Europeans are a bit more cautious. You can see the purple bars towards the end there. The UK at the top, Germany, France, the least likely to be in this potential early adopters group. Looking at the demographics of these people, men are more likely to say that they would eat meat produced in this way. 30% of men, a lower figure for women. And then the age is, as you'd expect. The younger the adult, the more likely they are to be open to this, producing meat this way and eating meat this way. Big drop off into the 45 to 59-year-olds, even further to the 60-plus-year-olds. And then further into the demographics, again, as you'd expect. We see that the higher levels of education, if you're a university graduate, if you're a postgraduate, you're more likely to say you would eat meat produced in this way. If you earn more, you're more likely to say you would eat meat produced in this way. It's really, that changes from the $60,000 US income upwards band, and you can see rises all the way through to the highest income band of 150,000. So that's the demographics of that group, of the potential early adopters. But what can we find out that's a bit more interesting about them? Well, let's look at them in the terms that we were talking about earlier, that Dirk was talking about earlier: animal welfare, sensory, the environment, those terms. And let's start with animal welfare. So what we can do is we can look at vegans and we can look at vegetarians in the population And amongst them, who are the people that potentially are the early adopters? How many of them say they would eat meat produced in this way? Well, it's pretty high. 42% of vegans say they would eat meat produced in this way. 40% of vegetarians say they would eat meat produced in this way. So what we're looking at here is the section of vegans and vegetarians that are in it for the animal welfare reasons. They're not necessarily against the taste of meat. They're not necessarily against the sense of eating meat. But they're in it, they're vegan, they're vegetarian, because they don't want to have animal slaughter on their hands when they eat their food. But there's plenty of them that are prepared to eat meat produced in this way. And I think this is a really positive point for the industry, because other research that we've done at Euromonitor International around the world of plant-based foods shows that the vegans and the vegetarians are the people who buy those products most frequently. They're not the biggest group, of course. Under 5% of people identify as vegan around the world. People who are cutting back on meat are a bigger group. That's a much wider section of the population. But those consumers eat and buy meat substitutes less frequently. So the fact that there are so many vegans and vegetarians who are willing to eat meat produced this way is certainly a positive sign. If we look at climate footprint, fewer of these potential early adopters are environmentally driven than animal welfare driven, but it's still significant. If you look at flexitarian consumers, those who are cutting back on meat and trying to eat more plant-based foods, you can see that 35% of them say they would eat meat produced in this way. If you look at the number of people who say they try and have a positive impact on the environment through their everyday actions, it's 28% would eat meat produced in this way. And that's a very big group. That's coming up on 65% of all adults say that they try and have a positive impact on the environment through their everyday actions. Easy to say, of course, but 28% say they would eat meat produced in this way. When we look at the question of health, what we can examine is what kind of ingredients, what kind of things are people looking for from their food? And really interestingly, what comes out strongly when we're looking at this question of who might be the early adopters of cell-cultivated meat is there's kind of a bias towards digestive wellness that those results show. So if you look at the number of people who say they look for food that contains prebiotics, 35% of them would eat meat produced in this way. If you look at the number of people who say they want food that promotes digestive wellness and health, you can see that 30% say they would eat meat produced in this way. You can see the result for contains added vitamins there. But also, there's quite a few people who say they want food that's good for mind and mental well-being. And amongst them, there's a significant proportion who say they would be in this early adopters group. And that ties quite nicely to the age differentials we saw earlier, because younger people are far more likely to consider health, overall health, to be about mental health. And then if we look at sensory, very interesting finding here, I think. If you look at these groups of people who say they enjoy trying new tastes and new food combinations, people who say that food texture is important to them, people who say that they like to eat foods that are visually appealing, big chunk of each of them say that they might try meat produced this way. But I think the key finding here is the visual appeal. It's not just about taste, it's not just about texture, it's got to have to look good too. And you can see 32% of the people who say they like to eat foods that are visually appealing could fall into this early adopters group. And that's slightly higher than for the trying new taste and food combinations group, or for the food texture is important to me group. So it's going to have to look good as well. And then I just want to finish with this, which is I don't want to leave the impression coming away from here that this group of potential early adopters kind of have it all sorted. They think that they know exactly what a healthy diet is and they're following it all and they don't need to make any improvements. Well, they're more likely to say they want to improve their diet than general adults are. Right? 71%, if you look at people who agree or strongly agree with the statement, I want to improve my eating habits, 71% of those who say they would eat cell-cultured meat give that response. So you can see that they don't necessarily have it all together. And then they're also more likely to plan all their meals in advance. So this is not necessarily a spontaneous group. So that lends some credence to the sort of determinism of them to actually try cell-cultured meat in future. So I've just been laying out some of the things from our global study to show you some of the key demographics and what these early adopters might look like. It's very important to, as we say here, avoid the chasm as we move through the innovators to the early adopters. I'm going to hand back to Dirk to wrap up for us today.
Yes, thank you very much, Tom. I think this is a very important slide because this is what often happens to new products, new technology. There is a group of innovators, a group who's interested in these products. They want to try it out because they are intrinsically motivated to try out new kinds of foods. They've tried it out, but then you need to reach the majority. And in order to reach the majority, you need to have a different story that appeals to the majority. And I hope that today we've given you some insights into what this majority wants and how they currently perceive it. And there is still time, and hopefully I can come back here next year and we can show an improved uptake of these new kind of products. But there is, and I'm going to repeat myself, there is a communication challenge for this industry. So, last slide. We got a report coming up. A couple of weeks. You want the report, and you want the first to receive it. Scan this QR code, please, and we'll put you on the list. It's going to contain all the things that I've told you today and a lot more. So it's going to be very interesting. So hopefully that's going to be very useful for that. And right now we have some time for a couple of questions. So if there's anyone, yes, Peter. Does anybody have a microphone for Peter?
Do you have a microphone?
Yeah, we can hear you now. We can hear you now. It works.
Wonderful. Thank you. First of all, thank you for a wonderful presentation. Your scheme, taking it really at all together, and could be used for a lot of discussions. Two very practical questions. Communication is on wording. What is, to your stomach feeling, the best word for bioreactor, fermenter, things like that, in communicating with normal people? I don't call them consumers, I call them just citizens, our family, our peer groups. What is the best word for that?
Well, we should, I don't know exact words, and it obviously depends per language. What I thought was very interesting, and a very interesting approach, is to call this new meat, to call it clean meat, and to call conventional meat slaughter meat. That would put the both options in the right mindset. But you're absolutely right. This is very important. We need to find the right wordings. We're not there yet. We have some indications of what we should not be doing, but what exactly the right word is, we don't know yet, and it's going to depend per language. But definitely avoid anything that has to do with lab or lab coats or laboratory or the technical side. Consumers are really not interested in that.
You would be invited to work on that.
just to add on to that, I think I think two things. One is not to obfuscate but shy away from using the actual words, but first of all, communicate the fact that where these are already used in other food processes or processes that consumers are used to, or things that we all enjoy in everyday life that have these. I mean, there's lots of examples out there of demonstrating food systems or food production techniques that already use similar things or go through these ways. But the other thing is working to address consumer perceptions that meat or any of these animal produced foods in other ways are created through some incredibly straightforward, clean process of animal death food, and ignores any of what consumers might consider scientific processes that go from getting that animal to the supermarket in a neatly packed package. It's not as if food is entirely naturally produced and it just ends up there. So education in that piece as well is important from the other side, I think.
Yeah. One more quick question for you. Oh, it's off again.
Again, sorry.
Yes.
to your stomach feeling, what would be the ideal first product appealing to the mass of consumers? We learned what it is not. So it was called advice to industry. I would say it's also advice to the scientific and the RTO community because we are all working on that. What would be the ideal
I'd
kind
say
of product, the first entering?
an ingredient in a hybrid product. I think that would be the most, something that is not a very big part of a product. It's just a small ingredient, and you don't have to call the whole hamburger cell cultivated, but it's been enhanced with clean bloody bar protein or something. That might be a low barrier threshold for consumers.
That's very indicative. Thank you.
You're welcome. How much time do we still have? One more question. Sorry, we'll be here to answer all of your questions, but we have to leave the stage pretty soon. Yes.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. You could say 10% wants to eat it, and then you can say that's not a lot. You can also say, yeah, in a technology adoption curve, I think the first part is 2.5%, and now you already have 10. That's a lot. Is there any useful benchmark towards other new products in which context we should look at these figures?
Yeah, these figures are stated behavior, and we know that we can't directly translate that into actual behavior. So if now 10% says they're going to try it, in reality it will be much lower. Or if the industry comes up with the best, the most appealing story, it can be higher. But we are already benchmarking these numbers. We did the first measurement this year. The figures I showed. We're going to show something next year to see if it has improved. And we're not just benchmarking these biotech foods. There's also insects in there. There's also GMO in there. So we have, let's say, a benchmark, and that we can compare it to other foods. But in reality, based on these numbers, I cannot predict how much it will be in reality. But we will be able to see if it goes up or down in the coming years. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much for your attention. Hope you enjoyed it, and hope you'll all read the report when it comes out, and that you will find it very valuable. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, you two. And as you said, I'm very glad that you would be open for questions and for people to approach you should they feel a need to. So thank you so much for that remark as well. We do have a very tight and packed schedule, so we are going to move right to another session. We will have now a chance to explore how professionals in the food service sector can drive change by collaborating with producers, suppliers, and engaging directly with consumers. When food service professionals interact directly with consumers, they influence trends and foster sustainable networks and communities. Given the significant role of the food service industry within the broader food system, it's essential to develop customized sustainable practices, and sharing knowledge and success stories is vital for creating a blueprint for sustainability. We will now have a session on serving sustainability and health. Food service professionals, sparing head just and tasty transitions. And I hope that she's ready, but I'm really excited to invite on stage the moderator of the session, Estefania Simon Sasik, who's founder of Mycelium Gastronomy Network. And I hope that she will be with us in a minute. In the meantime, I will also introduce speakers who are joining. With us will be the co-founder of Wasteland, Darath Hunchamlong. We will also have head of global certification at the SRA, Julia Holiday. We will also have entrepreneur at Hakama Sheep Farm, Maya Sutarinen, and joining us will be CEO and founder at Sopkirket, Philip Lundin. So this is all of the panelists, and I have now named them all, and I invite you all on stage the moment you're ready. As I mentioned before, the session is on serving sustainability and health, food service professionals spearheading just and tasty transitions. The moderator of the session is Estefania Simon Sasik, who's founder of Mycelium Gastronomy Network. Whenever you're ready, please do come on stage. We're all ears. We are happy to have you here. And the floor is now finally yours. Thank you. We'll give you a big round of applause for finally appearing.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good morning. Before having our speakers on the stage, we're going to have a little bit of an introduction and scene setting from Julia Holiday. She's a manager of Food Made Good Standard at the Sustainable Restaurant Association. She specializes in driving sustainability in the hospitality sector. Her career spans from selling chocolate to London's Borough Market to working on sustainability projects with Food Bank Network, Fairshare, and chocolate manufacturer Valrhona, bringing a wealth of experience in food sustainability. Please, Julia, come to stage. She will do a little bit of scene setting in what's the state of sustainability and health in the restaurant food service sector, and tell us a little bit about her standard.
Hello everyone, lovely to meet you today. Today we're going to be talking obviously about spearheading a just and tasty transition. My role today is to set a bit of context. Oh, back. There's missing a slide. Anyway, if you're here today, you know that the world is in crisis. We are suffering from a climate transition that is not going well. Biodiversity loss, water scarcity, global malnutrition. The issues are really, really challenging and really scary. And our food system is at the heart of a lot of these issues. I don't know about you, but I actually feel quite scared sometimes when I see the news. And also, at the moment, there's a general kind of depressing vibe, I think. What keeps me going, though, is the fact that food service and the people I talk to every day are actually doing things that are trying to make things better. Our industry, which is, to be honest, so often forgotten about when we talk about food transitions, food systems, and even the green transition in general, is actually a massive lever for change, and a really exciting one as well. Our sector is uniquely positioned within society because we actually sit at an intersection between where diners and producers come together. We're producing chefs, restaurateurs are able to use their creativity and bring people together around shared experiences and change the way people consume and use their storytelling abilities to really promote different practices. And they're also able, through their buying decisions, to have a knock-on effect across the supply chain. So to use that lever, which is a massive lever, the food service sector is, in the EU alone, there's 1.5 million establishments. It's a massive employer, and there's a lot of money. To use that to actually further better practices. There's a great opportunity. So if you're feeling despondent, have hope. There is reason to act, and there's actually people doing it. Oh, it's the old presentation. Doesn't matter. Anyway, I will talk to you anyway about what we're doing. Let me just check, sorry. So we're in a really unique position to act. But then the question is, great, we have visions for the future. We talk about this all the time. We want a better, fair, healthy transition. But how do we do it? Well, the first way to do it is really to work towards those common goals that have been set, the SDGs, but make sure that they are practical and tangible for the food service sector. So the SRA, or the Sustainable Restaurant Association, the way we have tried to do that is to set a framework of what good looks like in the sector. And that's translating those SDGs into really practical focuses. We have our framework, which is called the Food Made Good Framework, looking at sourcing, society and environment. So how restaurants can work with their suppliers, how they can choose ingredients that are better for the planet, for example, produced to higher animal welfare standards, better environmental standards, fish that is sourced more sustainably, and having a balance on the plate that is more plant forward, all the while protecting human rights. There's also the issue of society. Your team, restaurants' teams, are key to their success and also driving change. But all too often when we talk about transitions, we talk about environmental transitions. We forget about the people. So making sure that staff are treated fairly, people, your diners, are fed well, that also is often left out conversations, and that your community is involved in what is happening is key to the success of your business, but also having a more positive impact in your business and further. And then the environment of your operations, so energy use, water use, your waste practices, obviously prioritising the waste hierarchy of reduce, reuse, recycle, divert from landfill. So through our framework, we're trying to help restaurants identify what good looks like and measure what they're doing and how they can go further. Another really key way of pushing the food service sector towards a better transition, a tasty transition, is to build that global network. So you here are part of that, and I'm sure you've been talking to each other. I hope you'll also talk to the people on the panel afterwards. But sharing best practice and making sure that we're all working to those common goals is vital. Our sector is super diverse. That it isn't unlike the say the energy sector, where transitioning to renewables would be almost a magic wand. In our sector, there is no single solution. So it's actually a case of how can we bring together that diversity and harness different ways and different visions of sustainability towards having a better impact. And there are really great ways that are things that are happening. I think that we'll talk to some people today about what they're actually doing. But there's so much kind of reason to hope and reason to believe that things are happening, from fine dining restaurants that are promoting traditional indigenous practices around sourcing to multi-site chains that are tackling their environmental impact. So there are different ways that you can get involved, there are different ways that people can get involved, and believe that there is a reason to act, and know that the food service sector is one that shouldn't be forgotten about in these conversations, because actually it's one that is driving huge amounts of change. So, with that said, quite quickly, without my slides, I would like to invite the rest of our panel up to talk, and we're going to be looking at
I will introduce
that.
them one by one. If you could just please take a seat, Julia. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I will have now Tarat Homchamlong to step in the stage. He's an expert in food, hospitality, and sustainability. Tarat holds an MA in food studies from NYU. He consults in sustainable development, food, and hospitality in both public and private sectors. Co-founded Wasteland, Thailand's first sustainable bar. Tarat's work aims to inspire collective action to transform food systems. Welcome, Tarat. Next up, Maja Suntarinen. Combining environmental sciences with business development, Maya runs a small sheep farm with a tourist-attracting restaurant in the middle of nowhere, as she calls it. She specializes in innovation and sustainable business development for restaurants and travel businesses across Finland. And last but not least, Philip Lundin, founder of, trying to pronounce this correctly, Köket, which is called Waste Kitchen, a kind of word play with soup and waste in Swedish language. He's an award-winning catering company in Stockholm dedicated to fighting food waste, hunger, and social exclusion. Since 2015, the restaurant has rescued 90 tons of food waste and donated 60,000 meals. Philip will share insights on running a successful circular catering company and introduce the Great Taste Zero Waste Manifesto created alongside EAT partners. So thank you so much for coming. These experts will explore how food service professionals are driving positive change towards more sustainable and healthy food systems. They'll discuss innovative practices, challenges, and opportunities in sustainable operations, health-promoting menu design. Julia touched upon it quite briefly. Local food systems, waste reduction, and balancing sustainability with affordability. So let's dive right into it. We have a quite diverse panel, so let's try to stretch our thinking about what food service can do for spearheading this transition. So let's start with Tarat, the speaker that's coming from farther to this congress. So I first wanted to set the scene, kind of understanding how your zero waste bar concept challenged traditional practices in the food service industry, and what were your bigger hurdles in implementing this concept.
you. So when we first opened up, hello. Okay. When we first opened up Wasteland, we faced a lot of hurdles in terms of understanding from communities, even within the restaurants, F&B, and hospitality, because back then people were not fully adopting the transitions or like introductions of sustainability yet. So we had a lot of pushback because the understanding on the process of how food travels or how food is handled and the state of foods is still like poorly misconceived. And the way people perceive food surplus or food waste, they perceive it the same as a plate waste. So we had to do a lot of educations and also finding ways to introduce these ways to communicate what is which stage of food to different clienteles and also people who we work with, such as like producers or small food businesses that we would jump in and then ask them to open up like how do they produce the food, and then not only to find about traceability and transparency in how they produce food, but also we always because the bartenders perceive like flavors and the way they make drinks different than chef in many ways, so they would spot like these stages of food which tend to be overlooked even in production system, like, and then we would show them like, okay, how can we keep this with proper like food handling, and then we can process it into like elements or parts that we can use in beverages or even non-alcoholic beverages. And yeah.
And how did you bring that understanding? What kind of, I know you do a lot of community
Yeah.
engagement and
Yes.
like cross-disciplinary collaborations in Bangkok, so I'd love for you to share
I mean,
with.
when I first started out, I was in the kitchens and I started spotting like these parts that chef like no longer has place to fit in within the tasting menu or the menu that they design, and I started collecting these in many stages, like dry, wet, liquid, preserve, and then I basically poured this up in like one storage and then walk around asking people in the industry like, would you want to work with this? And that's how I started.
So very hands-on DIY approach to it. So Maya, from northern Finland, another place completely in the world, you're both a farmer and a restaurateur. So there are some tensions between these two sectors, between supply and demand. We know it a lot. Farmers complain that chefs don't want to use certain kinds of products, and then chefs complain about farmers not wanting to produce different things. This is something that is quite heard of in our industry. So you holding these two positions, how do you balance these demands of sustainable agriculture and the need for a successful restaurant business? We can't hear her.
Let's wait. Oh, now it's on. So I started with the farming, and the farming came first, and it has always been the first thing for me. My background is in a city, in business development things, and then I just wanted to produce food. And then I understand the bad ways of the business and how poorly many things have been done in Europe and in any other country, and it was horrible, and I just wanted to do it differently. And then I started selling our products to restaurants and noticed that this is not the way to do it. And then thank God I found wonderful people, and we started a restaurant, and we started buying our ingredients straight from other farms that are really local and really close to us. We work in a really remote area, so we had to be sure that the customers will find us and they will be there when we need them, when we have something to sell for them. So that's in the beginning I started buying things, but I also put a lot of effort on online sales. We started our own web shop, and when a person wanted to come to our restaurant, they had to book in advance, but also pay in advance. They always kind of booked how many courses they are going to eat, and we have fixed price for everything, and we got the money before. So then I knew that I can pay for the farmers as much as I wanted to pay them. And then I was able to get the best ingredients whenever I wanted them. And it was the only way to work in a really remote area. It's over 30 kilometers from the nearest town, and over 10 kilometers from the nearest bigger road. So nobody comes there like, I'm just going to buy pie, because they won't. So I just had to find a way to kind of work with the farmers and know what they are producing and when they are producing, and then work with that.
So that's very interesting. There's a lot of business insights in cash flow management, and also kind of like nudging consumers and clients into buying into more sustainable business models. But going from a very remote area in the Nordics to a huge capital and a way bigger operation, Philip, I wanted to kind of poke you, and if you could explain to us how your circular economy concept works for a large catering, that is what your main focus is, and what impact has it had on reducing food waste and in your community?
We are doing so many things at the same time. So what we do before we serve the actual catering is much more than just cook meals in a kitchen. It starts with sourcing the ingredients from the supermarkets and farmers where that we collaborate with to rescue food waste. It's maybe 20 different addresses to source the different ingredients from tomato to fish and everything in between. And we do this every day in Stockholm and outside of Stockholm. Then we go and pick up. They have different spaces in their supermarkets with our sign, Sopköket, on the wall, and we go and pick up and drive it to the kitchen. Then it's a lot of work to take away the bad things from the good things. Sometimes they are mixed. 10% is bad, 90% is really, really nice. And sometimes we get nicer things than if we were gonna buy it ourselves, because it's like so luxurious food waste partners that of course I'm biased, but really nice partners that we rescue food from. And then but it's a lot of work to take care of this. Then the way we work to be able to be efficient enough to have all this extra time to go and rescue and also donate food that we do at least twice a week is working a lot with the freezer. So we prepare the rescued food like parboiling, vacuum packing and freezing it in a large freezer space in our kitchen, which has really been key for being able to run this kind of circular business. So we build up a food bank in our kitchen of frozen rescued food ingredients of different things. And then when we cook food, we do it in big batches, no matter if we have a small or big catering event. And we do it in big batches and then we freeze it again. So when we have a catering event, it's kind of like building a Lego of frozen stews, salsas, smoothies, anything, even bread, like anything that can be frozen. We just take it, build a Lego, and serve it to a customer. So a wedding catering for 200 guests, we maybe only have 2 people in the kitchen working to prepare it because most of the things are already cooked. So in this way, we are able to have enough time for our staff to do all the other things like going and rescue food, donating meals, and also training half the crew that is employed from marginalized communities. So that way we were able to find a sustainable business model. And then it's thanks to our catering customers that we are able to like get the income to be able to both be profitable. We are right now, thanks to this like freezer centered logistical model, we are the only one in Sweden that reached financially positive numbers doing all these circular things, but it's thanks to being efficient working with this freezer, and it's thanks to our catering customers basically. So, yeah.
So you know, if you're getting married in Stockholm, you know who to get your catering from.
If you're getting married, do it in Stockholm. That's
you know, a wedding destination, as we all know. No, that's fantastic. I'm amazed by the ingenuity with which you have showed to approach some really big issues in the food service industry that of course impact and have ripple effects on greenhouse gas emissions and all the other metrics that we're trying to hit when we're thinking about an industry that collectively feeds millions upon millions of people daily, like all of us today, without going further. So I wanted to hear from Julia's perspective, from the Sustainable Restaurant Association, what other kind of really interesting initiatives or examples have you seen from chefs approaching sustainability with innovation and ingenuity?
Is it on now? Perfect.
Yeah.
So we work with restaurants in 31 countries across the world, around 6,000 kitchens currently. And so we see a really diverse kind of set of approaches to sustainability and a lot of ingenuity. I think some of the things that really come through are the importance of taking a holistic view and really, from the beginning, designing your menu and your offer with sustainability and your impact in mind. Maya and Philip have already talked about their examples. We have someone we work with, Ozone Coffee, which is a cafe and restaurant, for example. They design their menu so that they design half of their menu and then decide what they're going to do with the waste that will be produced from those dishes to create the other half of their menu. Really simple in a way, but actually from there you are getting rid of you're making sure that that waste is not being produced in the first place and is also having a really delicious and varied offer. So holistic approach, I would say. Something that is less maybe innovative but quite important is actually having an idea of what your impact is, so measuring. Things like food waste audits, measure how much waste output you're creating, stuff like that, so that you know what you need to tackle. And keeping an eye on that is really useful. Another really key thing is to get your stakeholders, your team and your suppliers on board and work with them. We can't make change if we do it alone. So again, we've heard from the panel today, but we work with a restaurant in Spain called Aponiente, who's very well known for being a pioneer in sustainable seafood. One of the things that they do is they work with local farmers and local fishers to promote kind of salt wetlands and I can't remember the exact term, tropical aquaponics, but basically trying to use traditional practices and promote green jobs and source seafood that is going to meet the needs of the restaurant, but also promote what's happening in the local community. So working with your community, working with your suppliers, working with your team, and making sure that the team as well, understand the why. They're not just there to put in place what you want, they're there to actually also shape your strategy. And I think that's really important. Measurement, team, yeah, I think those are the key things I would say to start off with.
Yeah, that's really important. Also coming to the fact, and I think maybe this is an interesting insight for our audience, is that you guys are all running tiny innovation labs where a lot of these processes in smaller scale can be then thought of scaling up for the food industry, that sometimes is lacking a bit of that ingenuity that the restaurant industry is called upon to just have it as a resource because of the scale, the constraints, and I'm not sure if you know, but sometimes the economic model and the numbers are really silver thin in terms of profit. So it's an industry that requires a lot of innovation. You want to add something? Yeah?
Yeah, I would say there's a real role to play of different types of businesses in our industry. So smaller businesses, as Estefania has pointed out, can be innovation labs. Bigger businesses have that force of impact. One change can have a really big, sudden effect. So there are different ways that we can bring our strength to the table. And I think that I come from a background where I used to work in a high-end chocolate manufacturer working with premium restaurants. And so I definitely came into this role in the SRA being a bit snobby about quick service restaurants and much more casual dining. But actually, they have a real role to play as well, because that's accessible food, that's touching a lot of people's lives. So how can we get those actors on board as well? And part of that's showing the way, and part of that is not freezing them out.
And there's, if you go into sustainability reports of the biggest QSR restaurants out there, they all have a smallholder farmer strategy in place, a net zero strategy in place. So how can we empower that diversification through, better practices? So I think there's a little bit of a tension between, well, I don't think so. I think it's obvious for all of us that there is the current model of food systems and the other one we're supposed to get at, and now we're in this gray area of transition where we're kind of repeating the same ideas. a bit stuck in some goo. And there are some mismatches in supply, right? So I was wondering, Bangkok, a mega city, how do you connect these professionals from urban areas of that size with local supports, local food systems? Is there such a thing as too small of a stakeholder to create community and alliances? And can these create closed loops and curb food waste, or inspire globally?
I think people tend to view like, or even themselves when they work in such a small operations, right, that they are so small they can't do much. But for the case of like SME restaurant business in Bangkok or in Thailand, I've looked them up and they register one like around 300,000 ones just in Thailand. This is only the register one, so we're not talking about like street food or other vendors that are out there doing something. And so I think one thing that people tend to see, they only see within the industry they're in. Like if they work in restaurant, they only work within the restaurant. But if you see far beyond that, like restaurants need supplies, and then the restaurant work with sources from like 50 to 100 farmers or even more than that. And a little fun fact though, like I think farmers in Thailand are more tech savvy than like most people in urban cities. They adopt those things like far too early on, like, and then they have already, when it, like you said, like they adopt like these policies and strategies on like carbon and emissions, everything like years ago, because they have learned and acquired those knowledge like through internet and or learn from like visiting farmers, exchanging knowledge within farmers from across the world. And what Julia mentioned too, like about community, that's what Wasteland's trying to build to, like cross sections communities, bringing in new faces or cross industry that usually doesn't appear in a food industry at all. So that would expand like the awareness and also exposure, and then introducing them to like, yeah, like there's many other actors out there, smaller ones, which are really making impact. And that I think people should be more aware and like more proud of what they do as a smaller holders or even small restaurant businesses.
Both Tarat and me come from the global south, and where we come from, climate change is not a theoretical exercise of in 20 years we will grow bananas somewhere. We are experiencing on real time the effects of climate change, such as drought, electric shortages, etc. So there is a lot of stakeholders already adopting rapidly a lot of solutions in renewables, new logistics, drone farming, and I think that is a very interesting insight into how can we learn from the places that are already experiencing what we are supposed to be preparing for in here, right? So say you wanted to add something, yeah.
I'm coming like Thailand still, like the north of Thailand right now is still experiencing heavy flood right now. Like most of the places in the north are still underwater, but then there are these farmers I talk to, or like I know the updates that they have, and these are the ones that adopt these practices like years ago, and they have been flooded, or they are able to deal with recover very quickly.
If I remember correctly, like earlier on, we talked about, or you talked about that still that's going on. Local people in Thailand doesn't really care about sustainability, or are not so into this. It's more like foreigners moving to Thailand or Bangkok that cares more about it. It's still like that, or it's a change ongoing because of these climate changes and stuff.
It's also the way we've been introduced to. Like even me growing up, it wasn't like for my mom. Like I wouldn't know anything about climate change because there was almost nothing in schools, and it's like a self-learning experience, and it's more like European unions or international organizations who kind of introduce or voice these concerns early on back in Thailand. But now we see a little bit of adaptations to that as well. Like people are receptive and like are more inclined to willing to learn like what's what.
So Philip, a question to you then. Do you think there is an actor too small to make a change from the perspective of, cooking in Stockholm in a very efficient operation for big caterings? How do you think is the role of all the this is an immensely fragmented industry. What is the role of the smallers, the medium, and the big in terms of the food service industry in creating community and advancing sustainability and health for all?
I think everyone has a role, and we are like, even though I'm part of this awesome group of people, all of us being here today and also in the audience. And people on Instagram, they see it and they think we're big, but we're only 3 people in the main crew. So even if you're small, like now we are, after 9 years, we reached break even 2 years ago, and right now, since 2 weeks ago, we moved into a larger kitchen in Stockholm and finally taking the step to try to like scale this operation up in Stockholm, which is super exciting. But we've been small until now and still for some more time. But even if you're small, you can really make a huge impact inspiring other people. So the size doesn't really matter like in this case as well. It's more about just talk about what you do. That's the most important. Like, if sadly, if you don't manage to get it out on social media, it doesn't really matter in the long run. Because, but if you are able to like post about things on social media on your platforms, it doesn't matter how big your operation is, I would say.
It's an excellent example of bootstrapping and creating measured risk towards growth, and I think there's a super valuable lesson in the way you have described the growth of your operation. So, more from the institution side, Maya, you also work in SME development, so from the business model to experts and scale up, etc., especially for food SMEs. So, from your work in this, what lessons can be applied to the broader food service community and the food community, if you feel like it?
Well, in my point of view, the first thing is to know your cost and learn how to count. We all have our mobile phones and we have our calculators and we can count. We just need to think about it a bit more. And then we need to find a way how to market our products. And that is the way that the Finns, we are really bad at that. We are trying to be more. We are talking about brands like the Swedes there. They are doing all the major branding things, and they are using social media more free than we do. And we need to be more brave, and that is something that I'm trying to teach other entrepreneurs, that they just have to kind of show out what they are doing. They need to tell other people, but you have to be profitable to do that, and you have to be sustainable if you wish. I hope that everybody wants to be sustainable. So you have to be profitable to be sustainable, and then you can tell the story about what you are doing. And the business model, it varies a lot. If you're a bigger company or smaller company, but you need to know your numbers when you are an entrepreneur, no matter how big your company is or small it is. And that's a big problem with smaller companies, that you don't know your numbers, and then you can't be profitable enough to pay to your value chain that they really should be paid for.
So, focusing a little bit on like brand creation, consumer trust, I understand certifications play a big role in convincing consumers about the certain actions of a business. So from your perspective, from the Sustainable Restaurant Association, what lessons can be applied to the food service and the broader food space?
So I touched on this at the beginning, but we at the SRA, we have a certification standard called the Food Made Good Standard. So the idea of having a certification is definitely in part to be able enable the restaurants we work with to be able to communicate what they're doing well and in a very simple way to their clients. We know that final consumers say they want sustainable food. Sometimes that doesn't necessarily translate to what they buy, but they want to at least be reassured that the restaurants they're going to are making an effort, but they don't necessarily have the time or energy to read everything you're doing. So to be able to communicate that in a really simple way, and also to give confidence to your consumers that you are trying to take a holistic view, because we know that sustainability is not a single factor issue. So making sure that you're thinking about your social impact, what's happening to producers, but also what are you doing with your waste, what you're doing with your carbon. The idea of at least our certification is to try and give you a very operational focus and cover those bases. So it's kind of consumer trust. It's also the value of any sort of certification as an idea is as well to identify a pathway. So that would be great. You're doing really well there, but there's a little bit of a gap that you could go further on. Things you maybe haven't thought about, and also to give you practical ways that you can go further. So with Food Made Good certification, we assess a client, we'll look at what they're doing, we'll talk to them, and then we produce a final report, which is essentially a roadmap of suggested actions, what you can do in your kitchen or your bar that will have an impact. Rather than be better for the environment, install bins. Things that are really practical. We're a very practical industry, and a very now-focused industry. So having a certification could be good for consumers, but can also be good for internal structure and identifying how to go further, I would say.
Thank you. We're going to do a takeaway quick round. I wanted to ask you, in your view, why is the food service industry uniquely positioned to drive change in sustainability and public health? Who wants to start? Julia, you want.
We'll go this way, I don't know. Well, I said at the beginning, I think we're in a really special position. We talk to a lot of different people at once. We connect people. We connect people through food, and we make people feel happy. People like eating, and people like coming together around food. You're sharing cultural traditions, but you're also sharing new ideas, and you're having an impact along the supply chain. And that's not every industry. So I think our industry is something that can be a real driver for change and a real vehicle for storytelling communication to drive that further food system change.
So short feedback loops and community outreach, great. What do you think? Why we are so uniquely positioned?
I mean, even going back to food cultures, like that's so unique, right? And how we consume food and celebrate food in different ways. And now that we also just kind of go back to the old ways of we cooking food or sourcing food or growing food as well. I'm also at the same time blending, adopting new technology as well. So I think that's really such a unique ways that we are exploring, and also discovering like how we can make food adapting to climate, also honoring like what comes as far as our roots. And like Julia said, like the community is bigger than we think, and we are connecting with people every day, and then even right now, like across the globe, and the impact is far much bigger than that. And consumers also needs to know they have a voice too, being part of this consumptions and eating food.
So in my point of view, I think that a restaurant is a really good place to teach, well, not only teach, but have a really good conversation with people. And in my farm and in those small farms that I'm working with, I always tell people that it's important to talk to other people, that we are part of a community. Community can be local or it can be wherever, but it's important to talk. We need customer feedback, but it's better if we get it with like really speaking with people and we get it in that moment. Then we can also tell them about our values, our things, that why we are doing things like we are doing them. And so I think that the most important is to like meet people and talk to them. And that's what we need to do more and educate with that.
Completely agree with everything, and I would like to add also like the third or one of our three things that we do with which is like creating the work opportunity with real full-time employment for these marginalized people from different communities. Can be refugees, people that doesn't know how to read and write. Often they live in clusters with only themselves. For example, like an Eritrean cluster in the suburb in Stockholm, they only meet with each other, only talk their Tigrinya, their language, never meet anyone else. Very bad integration policies in Sweden, probably some other countries in Europe as well, but I'm not gonna mention. But that part of our work is maybe the most meaningful for us, when we can see some of our catering customers interacting with these colleagues in our crew as if they are equal and would never meet each other in a normal day-to-day situation in town in Stockholm. Would like to add briefly to other things as well. Like for you guys in the audience that are working in large kitchens of different kinds. There are free tools out there as well for you guys, as you mentioned briefly before, like me and Jakub and some other people have been developing these free tools called greattastezerowaste.eu as a EIT food funded project some years ago. So there are great tips and takeaways there for free. Just go inside to greattastezerowaste.eu and you will find it. And the other thing for reducing food waste that needs to happen quickly, because food waste stands for 10% of the world's emissions, 5 times worse than flying, which we all did, most of us, to come here today, is like policy change, which needs to happen very quickly on the EU level, where France and Italy has been in the forefront, but all other countries also need to do changes. And I'm sure like we all have a lot of input on how, which policy change needs to happen. Yeah.
So thank you so much for coming to this panel. Why is the food service industry uniquely equipped? Because it has quick feedback loops for learning, for experimenting, for innovating, for later scaling. Because it is context fit from the get-go. So there's no one-size-fits-all solution, because it is an amazing education tool that appeals to one of the things that we love the most, eating. Because it is a tool for advocacy, both for integration and climate policy, putting in the same room people that are normally not in the same room, but they should. So I want to invite you all to tap into the potential of the food service industry. Come across the aisle and talk to other professionals that are also working and tackling issues, maybe from different angles, but for sure with the same goal. I wanted to open the floor for anyone for questions. We're managing to have a really good time, so if you want to add something, have a comment, or have a question, the floor is open for you. Yeah. It's a do-it-yourself panel. Thank you, Philippe.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you. It's actually a question for Philippe. I was wondering, we need to find more ways to conserve and preserve food, and frozen it, freezing it is one of the ways. But also, I'm wondering, how do you communicate to your customers in the catering that you are providing frozen food and still is good quality and still can like taste good and still can be in a way not fresh, but because it's well in the supply chain. So I think it's how do you communicate that?
I do it like this instead of this.
Okay. Perfect.
So, and then also like showing photos and videos from other catering, because that's like we don't only have that, we also have that we're called the garbage kitchen, which is like, even that is maybe more than the freezer thing. So it's all about how we talk about it. When I was starting it 9.5 years ago, I was doing it like this all the time, and everyone was saying that it's a bad name, it's not gonna work. But then it starts to like grow more confidence, and then people are like, wow, great name. So it's really about how you present it. And then it's been very important for us to break the boundary of and create trust with the possible consumer that is like reaching out to us the first time, and then it's very much talking about like photos, videos, past catering customers' reviews, name drop some of our food waste partners which they already trust, has also been like a big thing, like saying that we rescue from recognized supermarket brands, and name drop some of our catering customers as well. So yeah, all of those things combined basically. Yeah.
So brand association, I wanted to touch with you. He was with Tarat, sorry. He was sharing yesterday that you guys did a techno rave, zero waste. So I was wondering, where is the logic of those brand associations, and where are you looking at it in terms of communication? Because I think it might answer partially that question as well.
That goes back to like a lot of what the panelists has been saying to like communications and also educating customers as well. That I have to say, like when we first started out, there were times we were struggling because there was such a pushback from the community as well, like or from the industry as well, on how we do like same with the name Wasteland, and like it's not going to work. We're making making drinks are rubbish. And then there would, because we hold back, and then now we're not holding back anymore, and that's how it happened at Techno Rave thing. So earlier this year, me and my friends host an exhibition about regenerations, and when we decided one night we're gonna do like a full-on experience from dining to drinking and partying. So it started off with like dining with food cooked by refugees who migrated to Thailand and Bangkok due to climate change as well. And then they were running the whole service, and we put on music as they're related to nature as well. And all the drinks were coming from food surplus, and also parts that people were unnoticed to people before. But because we have many other actors that are not only from the food industry to help communicate about it, and because of the customer trust as well and perceptions that if this brands connect with this brand, they got on board with it. Like we got to work with like Soho House on that party as well, and many other DJs who are usually not part of the sustainability circle, and they jump on it as well. So that brings in such a diverse and mixed crowd to the party and the dining as well. And then people got to learn more about how zero waste drink is made, or what food surplus is, and what are they organic produce made from. So on that night, all the ingredients, fresh ingredients, are from regenerative farmers within Thailand. And then the DJs were surprised on that too, and then they got to connect with each other. And we are now like working with these designers and DJs on like how we can make biomaterials, or even like other objects that we can create to introduce sustainability in many different ways.
So out and proud. Do you want to add something?
Super cool, the things you guys are doing. I get jealous. Less raves in Stockholm with that potential. But I would also say like it's extra challenging for all of us doing our kind of businesses, because customer, in order for it to be a wow effect, the taste and presentation should be a little bit better than the normal level that is out there from other actors, so that the sustainability thing becomes an extra thing, because that's when it gets cool. So like Darat and your team was telling me like before that you guys do, like for instance, like upcycle shells from shrimps and make like reduce it and make it smell like flowers in a beverage, or like really cool things that becomes wow because it's rescued, and because the flavor and taste and the smell is better than a normal thing. So, and same thing, like going back to the frozen things, is like you can freeze things very easily in a bad way. So it's important also to like do it in the correct way without like connection with air. So like really tight, vacuum packed, and freeze it really quickly from normal like cold temperature under 8 degrees until frozen like fast. So those things we work with in our kitchen, so that the result in the end is not noticeable that it's been frozen, because that's when you get the consumer on board on the whole concept. Yeah.
We're regrettably out of time. I don't know if someone has a burning question. I wouldn't try to censor you. No. Okay, perfect. So diversity, great taste, zerowaste.eu. Follow diverse perspectives in myceliumgastronomy.com, network that we're proud to be a part of. And thank you so much for listening, and tap into the power of food service. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. Thank you for this colorful, insightful, and interactive panel. We are at full speed, so we will move to the last fair and resilient food system session on this stage this morning. Setting the table, standardizing food impact data is the topic of the next panel discussion. The panel will bring in various perspectives on the role of environmental data in the food systems. And to moderate that panel, I would like to invite on stage Ms. Cleona Howie Del Rio, who is the Director of Data Impact Systems at EIT Food. Let's give her a big hand, and then she will introduce her speakers. Thank you so much, and welcome. The floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. I understand we're running late, but hopefully we'll bring an exciting session for you. So I am joined today by 3 panel speakers. We have Dennis Koka. He is a researcher at University of Lund and specializes in systems dynamics modeling. We have Adele Jones, the managing director of Sustainable Food Trust. And we have Nicola Organ. She's a senior data analyst at EIT Food. So thank you 3 panelists for joining us today.
Thank you.
Right, so I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey today. As I was introduced, I am now the Director of Data Impact Systems at EIT Food. 2 months ago, I was the CEO of Foundation Earth that you see on the screen. Foundation Earth was a non-profit, independent organization that was created and founded to bring credible environmental impact assessment of the food system to the world, right? So when I say to the world, not just consumers through a label, but also to food companies inside the supply chain for B2B claims. Foundation Earth worked for over 4 years on doing very, very intense life cycle assessments, really deep diving into food products, drink and food products, on what is the impact assessment that happens. During those 4.5 years, what we found out that environmental labeling is not just a tool for consumers to be able to choose more sustainable food products, but actually it is a tool for the entire sector of the entire system with various sectors benefits. For example, it allowed food companies to be able to identify, detect, based on very precise and specific information, where are the drivers of environmental impact in their supply chain from a product level. So starting at a product level and working all the way backwards down to farm, where are those impacts and what can I do about it? We saw that it was interesting, generating this kind of intelligence was really interesting for the financial sector, meaning how can we use this information to make decisions on what are we financing, what are we funding, is it resilient? Is it resilient enough to be funding? Obviously, this kind of information supports meeting compliance, so there is all the traditional compliance, and I'll talk about that in a moment, around kind of environmental data for sustainability reporting, CRSD, ESG, et cetera, but also we have new policy coming in. So I'll talk about that in a moment. But really also, it was about trust. It was about generating trust in your supply chain to say, this is how we're working, this is what we're doing to make it better, and this is where our vision is and where we're intending to go. So it really is about a tool that empowers, informs, and communicates. We took a lot of learning from nutrition labeling. So over the years, there's a lot of work been done on different labels, and particularly from the nutrition labeling, we took a lot of lessons learned, good and bad. And one of the main things that we've identified is that trust is key. And trust is one of those things that's really easy to lose and really hard to build. So we built this up and with a governance structure, a strict governance structure that allowed us to have that trust in the work that we are doing. From those lessons in nutrition labeling, we got to work on a framework to build a credible framework that was based on science-based evidence, involved the whole value chain, looked at cradle to grave assortment of environmental indicators, not just carbon, looking across the whole range of environmental indicators, and we built a framework to do our work on. We then turned that into a tool for communication. For companies, for food companies working with us, we did deep analysis, really looking at data and the data quality that went into it, because not all data is the same. So we understood around our framework, around what is good data compared to poor quality data. And then we finally turned it into something that consumers could actually use, that we simplified it, right? So very complex information that food company would get, and converting that into something simple as a communication tool. We created a scientific method to do all this. We went completely open source with that scientific method. That's part of how we generated trust, was here's exactly how we're doing these calculations. Anyone can look at it, anyone can scrutinize it, anyone can ask questions about it. We were the first environmental label to actually go completely open source on this. So really proud of that achievement. We worked across all sorts of actors. We brought in loads of stakeholders and partners to make sure that our processes were inclusive, our processes were transparent, that we had insights from all those different actors on the value chain, so that we were really trying to meet and understand the needs, both commercially in industry, all the way down to farm level, but also at consumer level. We started thinking about, and I take this from the OECD, thinking about when we talk about data, and this is the topic of today's panel, what you're going to hear from these specialists, is when we talk about data, how important is this data? Is all data the same? What is good data compared to bad data? What is excellent data compared to poor data? And what if we can move beyond averages, right? So at Foundation Earth, we really focused on how do we get what we call primary data, so specific data of a food product into the assessments so that we're really truly telling the story of that product. One of my favorite slogans is that all apples are not created equal. So how can we differentiate between one apple from another? Particularly when you talk about seasonality, for example, talking about fruit, right? It's not the same, an apple from New Zealand as an apple from Europe. And we landed on that we need to look at the whole system, we need to look at the whole value chain, and we need to be incentivizing the whole value chain, not just at a product level, B2C, but all the way down to farm level. We need to create one coherent system that is synergistic across the whole system, meaning it's the same language of science-based evidence and the same framework across that whole system, so that there's credibility in it, and you're incentivizing not just engagement from consumer level, but engagement between all the B2B actors and the farm level. Foundation Earth, as of August 1st, 2024, has been acquired and integrated into EIT Food. So Foundation Earth is now 100% inside EIT Food, and what EIT Food is able to bring is a platform to be able to make this vision happen. I don't think any of us think we need 20 more working groups, 20 more labels. What we really need is to bring this together to harmonize. There are over 500 types of labels on food at any one day in Europe right now. So how do we bring this together? How do we stop fragmentation? How do we stop the confusion, not just for consumers, but for industry players? And that is the aim of this International Alliance for Food Impact Data. EIT Food is going to serve as an enabler of that, a coordinator, a convener to be able to make this alliance work for that purpose. And the challenge here, and I mentioned the policy before, we've got policy requirements all across the board of Europe, UK, even outside in other economies in the US, etc., that are extremely confusing for food companies to work across. How do we turn these policy measures that are aiming in the right direction into action on the ground? So we're setting up this alliance, this International Data Alliance, with key principles. The governance structure is fundamental for trust and transparency. We need to keep that open source philosophy. We need to make sure we're building and enhancing all work done now. There's no point in duplicating work. So you saw all the people doing all that work. We need to bring it together and build on that work. And we need to ensure that we're thinking about future-proofing, thinking about how we bring in technology, thinking about how we digitize this, thinking about how we ensure scientific best practice is constantly kept up to date in these standards, because it's what happened yesterday is no longer valid tomorrow. That's how quickly it's changing. And we make sure we need to protect commercial confidentiality. No easy task. It's going to involve actors all across the spectrum. It needs to be very inclusive to make sure we have all those insights of all the different actors that are needed to make this successful. And a little bit focusing here, you can see a little bit focusing on all the key elements, from policy to tech, to data standards, to assurance mechanisms, to consumer engagement. We really need to look at the whole system. So this is what the International Data Alliance will be about. We're launching it and announcing it today for the first time publicly. We're really looking forward to working on this. And today I want to introduce you to these three panelists who are going to talk about what their work with environmental means to them, why it's important, why standards and metrics need to be harmonized, and where we can work together to go forward. So Dennis, may I please start with you? In your work today, as a systems dynamics modeler, how do you see the role of environmental data? And do you see that there's a lack or gap with standards and metrics to be able to design pathways for the future?
I'm a researcher at Lund University. I try to do this integrated sustainability impact assessment. So environmental data is obviously one part, and then we look into economy, society, technology as well. So mainly the environmental data that we need for our assessments, it comes from LCAs, environmental LCAs. I'm particularly looking at how we do the sustainable primary production, at what end, and then another focus area is the alternative proteins, how we can diversify our protein sources. So there we're talking about data that doesn't exist or very limited. So to be able to come up with this proper sustainability impact assessments, we definitely need high quality, valuable data. And at some areas it exists, we use it, but at some areas it doesn't exist, or it does exist, but not the quality that we need for this kind of assessment. So to your questions, obviously it's very important. So standardization to get this data that we need for such impact assessments, integrated impact assessments, definitely we need such an initiative like you just started.
Thank you, Dennis. So I'll come back to you because I want to talk a little bit about modeling and how we model pathways using environmental data. But Adele joins us as the Managing Director of Sustainable Food Trust. Sustainable Food Trust is particularly well known for working with farmers on the ground. And this is notoriously difficult to get good data from farmers on the ground. Del, talk to us a little bit about your work with Global Farm Metric and why it's important to get good quality data at farm level.
Thank you, and thank you so much for coming to listen to us. It's great to be here. As Cleona said, I'm Adele from the Sustainable Food Trust. We're a non-profit based in the UK, but with a global focus to accelerate the transition to regenerative agriculture around the world. And we do that by figuring out what are the blockers to change at the moment, and thus how we can unblock those. And I guess a very quick story of how we came to this. Initially as an organisation, we were set up in 2012-ish. And we worked on a principle called true cost accounting in food and farming for quite a long time. So trying to place, where possible and where appropriate, a monetary value on the things that we as society do not yet value, like soil health, water quality, animal welfare, mental well-being of people working on farms. So we were working around the world with a number of consultancies and a project that was funded by the UN called TEEB Agri-Food, long acronym. And basically, they commissioned a whole bunch of studies looking at the true cost of all these commodities. So the true cost of palm oil, the true cost of fisheries, true cost of beef systems, true cost of all of these interesting things. And what we ended up with, I think some crazy amount of euros were spent on all these studies around the world. Each were commissioned by a different consultancy to look at the true cost. What we ended up with was a bunch of really interesting true cost of this, that, and the other studies that could not be compared, because every consultancy had, through no fault of their own, used a different methodology for looking at that impact and then monetizing that impact. At the same time, as Cleona said, we're an organisation that work a lot with farmers on the ground. They were coming to us saying, we're doing all these audits each year. We're doing, certification, regulatory compliance. We're doing our government grant applications. All these different audits each year. They don't actually tell us if our soil health was any better than it was last year. They're kind of tick in the box, often for market access or compliance, but they don't really give you that spectrum of how well you're doing and how well you're progressing year on year. So we basically threw the challenge back to farmers and said, okay, for us there's these two issues here. We need a common way of measuring impact so we can start to monetize the good things and the bad things that are happening with food and farming to change the economics. And we need to make this really simple for farmers. So we basically said to the farmers, why don't you design this framework? Tell us what you want to be measuring and you want companies to be reporting on. And that's really where the Global Farm Metric was born now about 8 years ago. We've been working with farmers as well as the people that need to use the data usefully to develop the Global Farm Metric, which is a framework. It's not a piece of software, it's a framework that looks at the environmental, economic and social aspects of what's happening on farms. There's 12 categories. Should have brought a slide with me, but globalfarmmetric.org is where you can find the framework. And we believe that there will be a multitude of different tools that farmers and businesses will use, but that the underpinning of those tools has to be using the same metrics, and those metrics have to empower people from the bottom up, not just impose on them from the top down.
Thank you, Adele. So, Nicola, you join us as a senior data analyst from Foundation Earth, now at EIT Food. You have seen over the last number of years working directly with companies, looking at these assessments of their food products, the challenges that they face in not only data collection, going down their supply chain, but also the challenges in managing this data. So can you share a few highlights about the challenges in managing this data and why metrics and standards are needed and how an alliance could support that?
Yeah, thank you. So we've been testing, as Cluna said, over the last 4 years, the methodology. We've been testing it with a wide range of companies, so from small SMEs to large multinationals, but we haven't just been testing the methodology. We've also been testing the application of the manual life cycle assessment and also an automated life cycle assessment. And we've also been working with a number of service providers and testing their tools on the application of the methodology and how they apply it. In our methodology, we are very specific about the primary data that is needed. As Cluna said, by primary data we mean very specific activity level data. And that's really important because if we want to have an assessment that is meaningful and that really kind of shows what the impact of their product is, we need to collect that very specific data, but it can be challenging. And I can talk about some of those challenges maybe a little bit later. We also are very specific about the secondary data sources that are needed. So the food databases, which capture information on ingredients, the country of origin, and yeah, that's used in our assessment. So sorry, Cleo, what was the...
No, that's fine, that's great. Thank you, Nicola. So Dennis, coming back to you, when we're talking about defining pathways for the future, right, and future-proofing those pathways, we look at saying, okay, we're starting from a starting point of knowing that our current food system is not sustainable. The way we are producing food right now isn't working, and we need to make decisions to change. So if we look at data as a tool to make informed decisions, and can data bring collective decision-making together? Right now we have a lot of fragmented decision where someone says, we need to go this way, and the other person says, well, actually we need to go to that direction. Knowing it's all context specific, talk to us a little bit about what role does data play in decision-making after you do these system modeling? So tell the audience a little bit about the importance of modeling for pathways and how data can play a role in actually allowing collective decision-making to happen.
As you named, I'm a systems dynamics modeler. So the whole idea with systems dynamics modeling is to capture this feedback loops in the systems. Obviously, nothing is linear. There are so many feedback loops in the system, whether it's reinforcing or balancing. There's so much time delays in the systems. And we're talking about hundreds, if not thousands, of these interconnections of like different elements of a system. So try to understand this complexity and understand these adaptive systems, because obviously things change in time and that system adapts to this new system, the new level of system. We need models. But when I say model, people get scared, and then it's not all about like formulas, numbers, equations. Everything is based on the conceptual modeling, what you understand from the system, what elements you have in the system and how they interact with each other. So there's a whole conceptual, this mental modeling part prior to this numerics and the data. So we start with a simple stakeholder analysis, try to identify, okay, if this is the system that we want to analyze, who are the key stakeholders to bring into this process of modeling? And then, of course, I mean, influence versus interest, who are these people? A simple analysis, and then onboard a series of workshops, try to dig into this causal loop diagrams, what we call, try to understand this complexity in a much better way. It's an iterative process. You define your system several times, your system boundaries, temporally and geographically. But then, with a consensus in the room, after learning how the system works, what it's all about, then it's time to get into the data. Then you realize that, okay, these are the data that I need to formulate the model. And of course, there you need the right data, the quality data, because the modeling part, and then in the end afterwards, you will have a a numerical model that will help you to make all this computational, because simply we cannot deal with this complexity, so we need this computational power. But it's that data that will be processed with the model, and then the model itself, with hopefully a nice user interface, will act as a decision support tool. So you will run this what-if scenarios. Okay, what if I change this system in the parameter? What would be the outcome of that? What if I change, reduce the feed production and then animal production, and then hopefully I will produce some other ways of alternatives? What will be the implications? How much land do I free? What will be the emission reduction of that? How much less fertilizer I will use in the system? How much money I will generate with this new biotechnology, etc., etc. So to be able to make all this type of integrated assessments, the data is crucial, because if you have the wrong data, of course, if you have the wrong formulation, wrong modeling computation as well, then all your decisions will be based on something that doesn't make sense. So it's extremely important to have the quality data standardized from a source that is reliable. So,
great. Thanks, Dennis. I like to make analogies all the time in my work, because data is maybe not the sexiest topic. Some people see it as very dry and boring, but when you get sick, all of a sudden you're really interested in data. You get sick, you go to the doctor, they're going to do your blood work. I don't want to be told the average white woman in Europe, this is her data from average white data of a woman. I want my data, right? I want my specific data. I want the doctor to diagnose me. And the way we see it is, for the food system, we need to do the same. We need to treat it as a sick patient, and we need to really understand the data behind things so that we make the right decisions. Dennis, you touched a little bit on kind of a holistic approach. Adele, in your experience, there's a lot of conversations around what do we need to be measuring for the food system? What are the right indicators to be measuring to be able to make informed decisions of what pathways we need to take about how we should be growing food, producing food, packaging food, transporting food? So in your experience at Sustainable Food Trust, do you feel that we get a lot of criticism like, well, carbon is easier, it's faster, it's cheaper? Where do you sit on thinking, is that enough to be able to take in a holistic assessment of food products in a food system?
Yeah, absolutely not is the answer. Unfortunately, actually, if you just look at carbon, it often leads you down quite a dangerous path with food and farming, because farms, food systems, they're so dynamic. There's so many cycles involved. And so actually, if you're just looking at a carbon footprint, and particularly the metric of CO2 equivalents per kilogram of product per area of land, which is generally how we work out the kind of carbon impact of particular products. It actually favours industrial agriculture, particularly when it comes to livestock. Just a kind of an anecdote to explain that a little bit. I was working with a fairly well-known restaurant chain in the UK called Oaxaca, a Mexican chain, and they were talking about wanting to switch their sourcing of halloumi, which they use quite a lot across their menu, away from a pretty intensive system in I think it was in Turkey, where it was effectively kind of indoor raised animals, to an extensive halloumi producer from Yorkshire. Beautiful story, amazing lady producing this cheese. Her animals were grazing across the moorland. It was like, fantastic story. They then ran their carbon footprint on this extensive system versus the intensive system, and basically because the sheep live for longer, and they're using a greater area of land to roam and graze, it means that the carbon footprint was like way higher for the extensive system than it was the intensive system. So that's where looking at things like biodiversity, water quality, animal welfare, the social side is really, really important to start balancing out some of these metrics, which looking at in isolation give you a very distorted picture. So we really firmly believe that when it comes to farms, holistic sustainability is incredibly important.
Thanks, Adele. So knowing Adele's background and experience, we're talking about decision-making tools, using data as decision-making tools for pathways, for companies. What about your experience, Adele, in working with policymakers? So how can data be used, and why is it valuable for policymakers to get the policy right?
Yeah, it's massively important, and for us it's always been the golden prize, I suppose, that government, national governments and international governments effectively mandate this harmonisation of data, and then make sure it's used through their policy decision making as well as the schemes. So, for example, in the UK, the post-Brexit farming schemes, which are a bit of a mess at the moment, no surprise there, but we have been lobbying since Brexit basically to ensure that every farm who receives public money from government should do an annual sustainability assessment based on common metrics, not new metrics, that look at the holistic sustainability of that farm. And we had a meeting with Michael Gove back in early 2017 when he was first appointed as Secretary of State for DEFRA, and he's, again, a very strange man, but was very intelligent. And we presented the early Global Farm Metric Framework to him with the farmers that had designed it. He was, you could see him kind of quite liking the idea. And he said to his officials, this is back when farms were still putting in for their single farm payment applications, and they've only just actually swapped over to the new system now, so 7 years basically since that day. He said to his officials, why don't we make receipt of the single farm payment until we move to the new systems conditional on collecting some really basic soil data that just involves digging a hole, looking at your soil, doing a really basic infiltration test, doing a worm count, and then a quick biodiversity survey as well. And his officials were like, oh God, no, you can't change the kind of single farm payment system. But in my head I was like, oh my God, we could, if he had done that, we could have had 7 years worth of fairly rustic primary data coming from all farms receiving government money in the UK. It obviously didn't happen, so we still have no primary data, basically. So it's really frustrating, but I think government, like one thing like that can have a huge impact if governments outtake this idea.
So I'd like to dig a little bit deeper in the value to food companies going through this process, right? So we know policy is coming. So to some degree, they're not going to have a lot of choice. We know that policy is currently saying you cannot make green claims without validating them, meaning you cannot say this is climate friendly, this is sustainable, this is eco, this is green, this is net zero, right? You have to be able to validate those claims. Nicola, in your work at Foundation Earth and going through, you provided grade assessments, right, at a product level to these companies, big and small, across all different sorts of food categories. What do you think are some of the real interesting points on, if we're looking at a holistic set of indicators, where did you see that this information, this kind of intelligence, how were companies using it? What did they challenge? What were they surprised at? And why do you feel this information was really useful in them actually changing the products they were producing?
Yeah, so what we found with the companies that we worked with, they've come to our company to test for a whole range of reasons, but probably 3 examples are some companies have their own internal LCA teams and they have their own tools, and what they're looking for is to compare what they do internally with our methodology, and maybe they want to expand, maybe their internal tools only look at a certain part of the value chain, so just they might model the farm part of the value chain in quite a lot of detail, but they haven't got the part of the modeling to model further down, looking at packaging, for example. So that's one reason that some companies do assessments with us. Another reason is that they're a company that have built their whole product and all their values on sustainability, and they really want to be able to demonstrate that sustainability by going through our process and labeling and showing that that good score, hopefully. And then the other reason, and many companies come for all of these different reasons, but is to really make improvements to their product, look at where they're having the biggest impact along the whole value chain, so whether that's the production of ingredients, whether it is the packaging, whether it's a whole host of reasons. And with the assessments that we've done, we have seen companies make changes to the ingredients, so the country of origin, they've switched from where they've sourced their ingredients, and that's had an impact on their grade when they've reassessed. We've also seen, going back to the use of primary data within our assessment, which is really important, we've seen that a company who their products are, they've done a lot of work to make sure that their products are sustainable. they were managed to work with their farmers to provide primary data, and we saw that that increased their grade compared to the industry average. It was of a confectionery product. So yeah, it's really seeing the value that data can have in understanding the impact all along the value chain. That has been the benefit of our methodology.
Thanks, Nicola. So we narrowed down all the way down to a product level, the scope at a product level, and how you can trace and understand the impact all the way down the value chain. But Dennis, if we bring it back to the big picture, right? And we're like, okay, product by product, how do we get this information, product by product, into being meaningful at the big picture level? Because obviously we need to look at this at a systems level. So Dennis, can you talk to us a little bit about why this scope of metrics at a product level actually feeds into big systems modeling, where we are taking big decisions at government level, at company and organization level, but really even at an international level for climate targets?
I just want to make these distinctions between the raw data. There's so much data is out there. It's numbers. Without a proper analysis, without a proper understanding of how you will use that model to come up with some framework or LCA or some systems dynamics model, in my case, come up with new sets of data for your further analysis. So there's difference between the data and the data. So you can use data to feed into your model, but you can get out data from your model to make the assessments. So we need definitely high quality data at the product level, at some part of the value chain, but of course, nothing is in silo, everything is interlinked to each other. So to understand these interactions between each of these data or the parameters that we're dealing with in a system is crucial at the policy level when it comes to this, when you're saying that this holistic understanding of such systems. So we're talking about systems that are complex, dynamics, changing all the time. We need to get the right data at every level. We need to process it in the right way, and then we come up with the data that is reliable so that we can use in our assessments for the policymaker.
Great. And Dennis, how do you feel that EIT Food is the right place to host kind of an alliance to be able to bring these frameworks together?
Absolutely. My research is very much applied research, so almost like a consultant. So I love to work with EIT Food because it's an organization with this massive network, not only from academia, from outside academia, public-private organizations, of course, the corporates, industry, etc. So being an European body on its very objective form and with this massive network, trust, you already mentioned that, it's extremely important in that. So I can't think any other organization than EIT Food who can take this lead and role in this what you're doing.
Thanks. So there's a lot of challenges in that. It's not going to be easy at all. But Adele, you've worked really hand-on operationally down at farm level, but also looking at how important that data is reaching policy. What do you feel are some of the gaps around, making sure that that data is trusted and feeding into the system? And anything come to mind about ideas of, how the Alliance can help bridge those gaps?
I think the biggest thing we're seeing at the moment, so where we're at right now is I think we've done a number of years of sort of consensus building around the metrics with farmers and other companies and organizations. And now we're really, trying to test that and I guess ask the question of, and what? Like, data is a means to an end. It has to be used to drive change in some way. And so the area we're particularly focusing on is how do we use common data to drive financing the regenerative transition, basically. But I think the big gap we're seeing is particularly with, well, I suppose maybe governments and companies, actually. I'm just working more with companies at the moment. They all want to be first to be second on this. They all have a competitive advantage by using, having their own regenerative agriculture strategy and their own KPIs to measure against that. And you have these very positive theoretical conversations about them all coming together and using the same metrics. When we go, okay, cool, let's do that. Let's start. You McCain, you McDonald's, you Pepsi, and you Waitrose. coming together and start using the same or asking your farms for the same information, it becomes really, really difficult to actually implement on the ground. There's all these legal issues and they all use a different tool, and all the tool providers kind of don't want to collaborate, even though they sort of do at the same time. So I think having a data alliance held under a kind of neutral body like EIT is going to be really important in building that trust and kind of letting all the companies feel that they're actually stepping into this challenge together. And it's totally the same with government as well. Governments around the world are all watching each other and what they're doing on data. And I think it's just that trust, that neutrality is super important as well. It can't be owned by any one company or any one organisation. I think that collaboration is incredibly important. And hopefully just helping all the partners we work with move into that space together.
Great, thanks. I've put this slide back on because one of the most important things that I think a layer of the complexity in the systems transformation is that we often forget about the financial sector, right? We focus on our work in this kind of environmental sector, but the financial sector is extremely interested in this information, right? And I mentioned this at the beginning. We had contact with financial sector across from insurance companies to investment firms to banks to big funders, right, of Regen Ag, of understanding, well, where does the risk sit? Where is resilience pathways sit? And how can we understand that through the data? So I put this slide up to show a little bit the benefit of impact scoring, not necessarily labeling per se, but going through the process and journey of impact scoring. This is obviously happening a lot at company level now with CSD, ESG I mentioned, but the product level assessments, not just as a tool to communicate to consumers, so for choice, because we do want to shift consumer behavior, we do want to give consumers the information at their fingertips to be able to make choices in an informed way, but also really importantly, again, in the last point around that supply chain collaboration, around being able to say, well, if I have the information now to know where I can make changes in my supply chain, that triggers a domino effect in that supply chain. In almost a marketplace for new ways, new ingredients, new sources. We've even had companies work at Foundation Earth around asking, we're thinking of new products, new product design, MPD, and where do we start from? So let's run some mock trials. But let's get back to the Alliance, and Nicola, you saw a lot of challenges around data verification, right? And Dennis, you very correctly talked about data quality, right? Data quality is absolutely fundamental into making these assessments worthy. And I have a philosophical question in my mind. Is it good enough just to do something and give poor data to everyone because you're doing something? Or do we really need to dig deeper to figure out how do we get the good data involved? Nicola, can you just talk a little bit about the challenges around data verification in the supply chain?
Yeah, so data verification is something that we've looked at in the testing that we've done, and we have developed an approach that I think we will develop further, and it needs more work as we join EIT Food around there's a number of different things to consider. There's the verification of the data, of the primary data that's used, and there's also the verification of the results and turn it into a final grade. And then there's also the certification of service providers to ensure that the methodology is being applied correctly. As we know, the data isn't perfect right now, and we collect primary data as far as possible, but there are still challenges around that we've experienced with testing. And even the secondary data, so the data that we have on emissions from ingredients and processes, that also has gaps. That's not perfect. It doesn't have every ingredient for every country of origin. So until we have data that is better or improved, and even then when we have more data quality is really, really important. And in our methodology, we do have what we call a data quality rating, and the use of that to sit alongside the grade, I think, is very important to give certainly B2B actors, as they're passing their information up the value chain, an idea of how much certainty they can have in this score and this grade is really important. Obviously, it's a little bit trickier if you're thinking about consumers, because that's a lot of information to give them in terms of a grade and a data quality rate, and they're probably not going to understand it. There are ways that could be dealt with, whether that's a shading of the grid, or that's obviously something to think about in the Data Alliance as well. But I think those two things go hand in hand in terms of the quality of the data and some metric to measure that, which we've tested and continuing to look at as we're reviewing our methodology, together with the certification and verification of the results and the data that we use.
Thanks, Nicola. Now, looking about the challenge of this, so she talked a lot about these challenges of data verification, and we need to do this at scale, a scale that's almost unimaginable, certainly for my small brain. But Dennis, can you tell us a little bit about your work in systems modeling and how you see new tech being able to facilitate this kind of data sharing? And we know that's for me, that phrase is almost, you know, we talk about data transparency. Companies don't really want to be sharing their data with anyone else, right? They're very protective about their data. So confidentiality needs to play a role in this. But how have you seen so far, and what do you see coming as far as technology that can help serve this purpose?
With two Horizon Europe projects that I'm involved in, we're looking into the sustainability impact assessments of novel foods produced from alternative sources of proteins, cultivated meat, seafood, precision fermentation. So these are all new biotechnology. There are so many multi-billion-dollar markets, so new startups, new companies, all interested in that. We're talking about producing medium to feed your animal cells or plant cells or the microorganisms. Company secrets. They don't want to, I mean, everybody is working hard to get the costs down. So there's a lot of things are happening that we don't know, we don't have access. And if you're going to model this, if you're going to see how the future of this new food system would look like, we need this data. And perhaps we need an organization like EIT Food who can help us to convince these companies, all the advancements in biotechnology, how to get the data that we need to feed it in our models. That's one thing that we definitely need to talk. And also, I mean, we see all these advancements in AI, in blockchain technology, so there's so much potential out there also to collect the data that we need to further process.
Great. So today, in summary, what I want to conclude for everyone, and thank you for joining us for this talk, is we can't underestimate the importance of data as a decision-making tool. As a tool, it's very important to stress that it's a tool. But to ensure that we're making informed decisions when we're looking at large pathway modeling, so how do we get to where we need to get to? Therefore, we have proposed a new international data alliance at EIT Food to bring together consensually around standards, around metrics, to look at how do we facilitate this with talent and intelligence that's in the EIT Food community and outside on how do we get there, what tech do we need, what rules of the game do we need? How do we do all of this while still ensuring trust? And how do we facilitate and promote this so we can actually speed it up and do it quickly? Enormous challenges. It has really not come together yet. As you saw, there's incredible amount of fragmentation so far, but that fragmentation is a real blocker on allowing us to advance. So the ambition here is to bring this alliance together to start facilitating cohesion and harmonization, standardization. If you're interested to know more, please do get in touch with us. There's going to be a lot of work around this. I've talked about, we've talked about policy, we've talked about the science, we've talked about engagement with farmers, engagement with consumers, we've talked about systems modeling and pathway design. So there's an enormous amount of outputs that could come, not just environmental labeling on a product level, but for lots of other important decision-making tools. So thank you for your time today. Please do get in touch with any of the speakers or myself if you have more questions. And we really look forward to what this alliance can bring and promote as far as advancement in transformation of the food system. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this very vibrant and informative panel. I can see that people are coming back, and I'm guessing this is because we will switch to the plenary mode and have our keynote speaker, Tim Spector, with us to speak about Zoe's app. And yes, I'm going on a loud mode. But we will take a couple of minutes, a short break. You don't have to go anywhere. The program will resume in a minute. It's just for technical issues, the headphones, the chairs, and so on. Do take a moment, relax, and we will be back in a couple of minutes. Thank you. We're going into track 3, plenary. We'll resume after that. We'll have two panel debates, after which we'll have a closing session. So let's start, let's resume. There is still lots of interesting content, and if you want to hear that, if you want to follow that, do use the headphones. In October 2023, biotechnologies were listed in the top 4 most critical technologies for the future of Europe. In March 2024, the EU Commission proposed a series of targeted actions to boost biotechnology and biomanufacturing in the EU. Biotechnologies shaping the future of food in Europe is our topic of the next panel. And I would like to now invite on stage co-founder of Shake Up Factory and EIT Food Protein Diversification Think Tank member, Kevin Confers. Let's welcome him on stage with a very, very grand round of applause. Thank you.
Hello, hello. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay, because I don't hear myself, in fact. So I'm very pleased to have you here. We have a very, very strong and big topic with a fantastic setup in the stage. So let me welcome Paul. Paul is, as you said, partner at McKinsey. He will make the introduction of this presentation, and he will share what they have produced as a research on the matter. And he will be completed in the panel with Stella Child from the great GFI Good Food Institute. Stella knows everything about the topic and also more precisely on grants, and you will tell us more about this afterwards. We have Robert Jones, who, from what you can imagine, is coming from the US, but he's been living in Europe for quite a long time now. He's public affairs of Mozambique, which is one of the most advanced cultivated meat company in Europe, and he also leads an association of startups that are dealing with cultivated meat. And last but not least, Christophe Lugel. Christophe has been is the veteran of the biotechnologies in Europe, and you will see why and how. But you've been on the matter for about close to 20 years now. 18 years, yeah. And you are the one who can tell us the best of all what can happen in the future. So let's start with Paul, who will set the scene and explain why we believe that biotechnologies can shape the future and the future of Europe.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Much appreciated, and also thank you, EIT Foods, for having this panel here on this important topic. So let me frame up a little bit our session on biotechnologies and why we think there's a potential for impact at scale in this important area. Okay, now I went a bit too quick. Yes, so to frame up our session around biotechnologies, imagine a world where we can use microbes to produce healthy and nutritious food for us, or a world where we can protect seeds and soils from degradation, or where we can use microbes to produce animal-free proteins and food ingredients. All of this is possible with biotechnology, and the technology is also advancing. And that's the topic of this panel. So it's not new. Biotech has been around for ages, over 10,000 years to be precise, starting with beer brewing a long time ago, but now also accelerating with mostly most recently around more the pharmaceutical applications. And as the cost is now coming down of these technologies, It can also be become a climate intervention, and it's accelerating in the use of that. So a lot to be excited about. Maybe just to align a bit on the basics, like how does it work? So we can use microbes, the power of nature, to basically turn sugars, but also small platform molecules, recycled content, but also CO2 and renewable energy into useful end products. And there's a wide variety of possible products, applications that one can make from that. It's like things like cosmetics, packaging, but also textiles, chemicals, you name it. And today we'll focus really on the food ingredients, food ingredients, and also agriculture applications. So why is it gaining traction now? I already alluded a bit to it, but let me just highlight a couple of the main observations that we've noticed recently. And the first, and for me also a very important one, is that we need a more productive food system. So many of the soils globally are degrading. Also in Europe, this is the case. 40% are degraded, and if we don't change our practices, this can grow to 90%. It's very substantial. And at the same time, global population is growing. That population needs to be fed, and hence, more food needs to be produced from more lands that are less productive. And biotech can exactly play into this, like making the system more productive, like simplifying production chains and driving impact at scale. Another important argument we see is that, like, if we see biotech also as a climate intervention or climate technology, we've observed a very strong cost out across other clean techs over the last decade. And it's almost a mathematical rule: for every 100x that a technology scales, the decarbonization costs come down by about 70%. So there's a very strong scaling logic that, of course, biotech is probably a bit different from solar panels and batteries and heat pumps and all, but that we expect there to be also in this space, and hence, like, thinking through how to deliver that is very exciting, and we're still at the very beginning of this cost out for this technology. Then moving on to a third argument, that is, of course, that it has massive sustainability potential, and this is not just on CO2, but it's on multiple dimensions. Here I've just put on or collected a couple of examples in the food space. We've assessed 500 use cases, but here you see the impact numbers for egg white protein and milk protein produced using advanced biotech. It has potential to cut emissions by more than 90%. It also can reduce land use by 95% and water use by more than 50%. And that impact is very exciting. If we now sum that across use cases or across all these places where biotech can play a role, it's a massive opportunity for value creation, so 1.5 trillion global opportunity. For emission reduction, so 6 gigaton, like more than 10% of global emissions, 6 times the emissions of aviation. 3 million square kilometers of land that can be freed up. That's equivalent of Brazil, and imagine what we can do with that, right? And then last, but definitely not least, it's also an opportunity for reducing freshwater use. It's twice the annual flow of the river now. I think this topic is also increasingly important with climate change and water scarcity, etc. And then there are probably also many impacts beyond that we haven't assessed in detail. For instance, biodiversity or reduced nutrient application in soils, etc. And or agriculture and food products are the main driver of these impact numbers. So in the financial value creation, it's about 2/3, and it's roughly in that ballpark also for the other dimensions, coming from engineering of plants and animals, but also fermentation, cultivated meats that we'll probably also speak about soon. Then, now all of this is amazing. What does it really take to scale? And based on the research that we've been doing with Kevin from Shake Up Factory, but also EIT Food and Good Foods Institute, over the last year, we see a couple of areas how to now really get this going and accelerate this. So first, it's very important to focus on applications that can be commercially accelerated and applied in the near term. So not in 2040 or 2050. Of course, by that time, we also need more technologies, etc. But if we can already have impact earlier on and like scale in a smart way, then this can really take off. And probably a way to do that is by also de-risking the set of technologies, the players that are working on this. And there are multiple angles to it. I think one important one is to take a demand-driven approach. So think backward of in which markets is this already close to economic viability, close to cost parity, and then securing offtake agreements to de-risk the scale out. Of course, also like drive cost reduction of the production. And if you have these two, it all of a sudden also becomes way easier to finance the facilities with like SPVs, debt type of instruments. And we think that can really propel and accelerate to the uptake of this emerging climate intervention, if you will. That makes the food system also more resilient. As alluded to, like we're excited about the potential. There's a lot of potential. Europe is also in a great position to take a lead on it. Many of the innovations actually originate from Europe, and hence is also this like group of collaborators now gathering around the topic that wants to unlock it. And in case you want to get involved, join the conversation, feel free to scan the code and drop a message. Later this year, actually beginning of 2025, we will launch a report on this topic with the collaborator group. So watch out for it, and I hope it will excite you as much as it does me and probably the rest of the panel. With that, Kevin, would love to hand back over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So you were talking about a 1.5 trillion opportunity,
yes,
and most of it coming out of food. And in fact, biotechnologies to apply to food is very new, very, very new. It's a topic that we wouldn't have had even 2 years ago in such a conference. But biotechnologies themselves are not that new. Christophe, for how long have you been working on the matter? 18 years, you were saying?
Yes, in fact it's 17, but yes, biotechnology have always been one of the key enabling technology within the biorefinery approach, biorefinery development in Europe, to addressing the market of bioenergy, or bio-based chemicals, bio-based materials, and if you deal with agriculture or with bio-based feedstock, the most adapted tool to convert it into variable solution to be brought to the market are most often the biological tools, hence biotech.
And so biotechnologies, how have you been implicated in it, and what does it mean for Europe at the moment, biotechnologies?
Biotechnology is the ability, yes, to use microorganisms to convert a molecule to another and create an added value to bring to a solution to the market. Yeah. So it could be fermentation, bioconversion, enzyme, through enzyme, or and to produce chemicals, materials, and high-value ingredients in pharmaceutical industry, in cosmetic industry, and more and more in food and feed industry.
And so until now it's been pharma, biomaterials, so alternative to fossil-based polymers. It's been biofuels also?
Yeah, yes, biofuel was a fashion, was a trend 15 years ago. Now it's a little bit decreasing, and I think the real future will be on bio-based chemicals, not for every chemicals, of course, for the so-called functional as chemicals, because you can manufacture in one step interesting molecules that can need at least 5 to 7 steps from a vapor cracker to obtain the same molecule. So it has a real added value. And furthermore, you can create new molecules, new functional molecules with new function, and it's really valuable in chemistry, which is the mother of all industry. And there have been a lot of initiative, and especially two public-private partnership based not only on that, but using this enabling technology, and which means BBI, the Bio-Based Industry Initiative, during 7 years, and now Circular Bio-Based Europe, funding by the European Commission to deliver using biorefinery tools, including biotech, to deliver the market solution to the market, what we call bioeconomy. And food, of course, is included in this bioeconomy. It was an approach 15 years ago and a mistake to try to separate the food uses and non-food uses of biomass, and they face the same challenge and addressing most of the time the same market.
So we will come back to it, but just to build on this experience that you've had, how many projects did BBI and CBE support in the course of the past 10 years?
I think it's 180 projects around, but interesting because within this public partnership, we focus on innovations, not research. We don't create knowledge. We use existing knowledge to convert into a solution to the work to the market. We start from TRL 3, proof of concept, to go to TRL 8. It means the first commercial plant through pilot, demo, and what we call in Brussels English flagship. And BBI and CBE, they have funded just 15 flagship, and 3 of them are related to food or feed additive.
And what you can state, building on this experience, is that biotechnologies, they really deliver on those expectations in terms of reduction of costs, reduction of sustainability impact.
Yes, I confirm they really deliver, and maybe not with the same molecule, but really deliver and have a value-added proposal to the market and to society. Of course, it depends on what type of molecule you are looking for. It is to replace big commodities like polyethylene and so on. So it will be a long journey to achieve it, but. It's not only a niche market. Biotech chemicals, bio-based chemicals produced by chemicals, they are already successful market application, and more. And so this is one of the key enabling technology of the future.
And so market application, Robert, you are example of market application that are very new thanks to those technologies. Can you tell us more about what you're doing?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me here. First of all, I just want to give a caveat that I'm a classically trained chef and a political and public affairs guy and not a scientist, so I'll leave more technical questions to the rest of the panel. But at Mosa Meat, our founders really pioneered this technology of growing meat from cells, and we've been laser focused on beef from day one. Bovine cells are not the easiest cells to work with, but we're focused on beef for largely climate reasons. And our final product is a minced beef, which really has an application in every cultural context around the world. But I think one of the things that's interesting about the space is since the sort of iconic 2013 burger that was debuted to the world, that everyone has seen this picture of Mark Post holding, we also really learned the value of fat. And as a culinarian, it's sort of obvious to me, right? Fat is flavor. But you know, the application that I think will be forefront for many companies will be the whatever animal protein they're making and the fat of that animal as an ingredient. And I think a lot of the Generation 1 products will be you know, a low inclusion rate of the animal fat and maybe some of the muscle tissue, but really to enhance the flavor of existing products like plant-based products in order to come to market in a way that is cost-effective and affordable for consumers. It's an exciting space, but there's still a lot of challenges, and it's really interesting that what you said. We made a mistake dividing pharma and food in the bioeconomy space early on. I wonder if we would be facing some of the same political challenges we have now if we hadn't started normalizing food as a biotech product 20 years ago.
But just to focus on what you're doing at the moment in terms of sustainability impact, what can you tell about what you're doing versus the existing beef?
Yeah, so I think one thing you have to remember is we're basically centralizing meat production and electrifying it. And that has upsides and downsides. The upside is that it's more controlled. The downside is that you then have to think about what is the input, what is the type of energy that you're using in that electrification and warming the bioreactors and all of the process around cell culturing. We know that if we have basically a positive sustainability score no matter what kind of power we use because it's beef, right? And when you think about methane involved in traditional beef production, and CO2 and all of the byproducts, the negative externalities. If you're making another animal protein like chicken or some type of poultry, the score may be a little bit different. But we know from LCAs that or life cycle assessment, if we use clean power in making our beef, that we can do that using about 95% less land than conventional beef production, about 78% less water, and about 93% lower carbon footprint in terms of greenhouse gases. So the gains can really be there, and now the question is, can the energy grid keep up with the demand that we're going to have as we scale up and we have that access to clean power? My company right now is on 100% renewable energy. But if we went to factory scale today in the Netherlands, there wouldn't be enough renewable power for us. So that's going to be another equation that we have to deal with as we grow as an industry.
And as an industry, Stella, GFI very recently issued a report about the potential of cultivated meat in Europe. What can you tell about it?
Yeah, well, firstly, again, seconding, thank you for having us here, and it's a pleasure to be here on behalf of GFI. So the report that you're referring to, Kevin, was an economic analysis of the potential of cultivated meat. And I think it supports a lot of what Paul just showed us, that together with the environmental or potential sustainability impact of these biotechnologies, they have a huge potential economic impact for Europe. And that makes it really critical that we take what we've got now, which is a really strong scientific ecosystem. This is where a lot of the original science has been done for both cultivated, for fermentation, for other biotechnologies in food. And we make sure that it's scaled up and produced in Europe so that the economic benefit stays here as well. So the report found that if you did pursue the kind of investment in R&I and in infrastructure scale-up that Europe would require to develop these technologies, it could have an economic impact of 15 to 80 billion by 2050. So there's a huge percentage. So it would become a really important industry for Europe. And what we've seen so far in terms of the investment is that it's taken a long time to get to the point where it's being treated, as we said, as like a valid part of the biotechnology sphere. The recent research I've been doing about like where the funding has gone so far suggests that for many years a lot of it was concentrated in just plant-based foods. That was sort of the preferred option for sustainable alternatives. Obviously in Europe we knew we had a sustainability issue around food, but we weren't looking for technological solutions to those problems, and we weren't really funding the research that needed to get done. And we've now got to the point where those technologies are kind of on par with what kind of funding plant-based foods were receiving maybe 5 years ago. So we're catching up, but we need to have a sustained push, and it needs to be part of our sort of Europe strategic direction.
Yeah, because when we look at this R&I funding landscape, how much of the Europe money goes to funding R&I in food? It's very small.
Yeah, I mean, I think, CBE JU has done a little bit, so that's circular bio-based economy. the joint undertaking has done a little bit of food, but primarily that hasn't been its major focus, and I think that is a historical choice based on that division between food and non-food purposes. And then you have, smattering of different agencies, both on EU level and on national levels, that have believed in these technologies and have started funding it more and more. Most of the funding has come since 2020, so we're talking like a really recent spike in interest and in funding. We just need to make sure that that is now followed through, so that those technologies, like, we don't just leave them in the university, we make sure that they have impact. We do things like funding the first flagship facility for those technologies. We make sure that the partnerships that need to exist between the existing food industry and new biotechnologies are made, so that we're not trying to recreate a new food industry, I guess. And that's the kind of energy that we're not quite seeing yet. We need that to happen.
Yeah, I saw a report this morning that was just issued by the GRC stating that less than 2% of the funding was going to alternative proteins, which is nothing, in fact.
Let me just add, I mean, I think that there's a broader challenge there, right? There's enabling conditions that create the funding environment that we wish for, and there's a gap on the policy front right now. I mean, there's encouraging things on the horizon, like the Biotech Act that's coming up in the Commission, but we've lacked policy coherence at an EU-wide level that would then drive the funding mechanisms to put out the calls that we could all apply for to push the technology along. And that's another piece that we have to talk about. The policy piece is so important here as well.
But is it is it also because it's a very recent topic?
I mean, I think that's one, but also what we haven't talked about at the elephant in the room is that there's also controversy around these technologies. And so unfortunately, a lot of the policy decisions are made by people who think about 5-year mandates and elections and are not necessarily thinking about a longer term horizon. And we talked a lot about sustainability so far, but the power leaning in the European Parliament and the Commission right now is not necessarily concerned about sustainability. We've seen a shift in our politics, and so, but where we can lean in, I think it's great that the GFI report comes out now and is talking about economic development, because that's something that can resonate with these people that are in power now, both at national levels in the Netherlands as well as at the EU-wide level. We need to be reframing how the value proposition of what we talk about in these technologies, in talking about European competitiveness, strategic autonomy in our food supply, food security, and not necessarily leaning in on sustainability. And that's not just for policymakers, but also we know consumers don't actually shop based off sustainability either. That's a nice to have, but they're thinking about taste, price, cultural relevance of what they're buying.
Yeah, but if I want to build on that, because having been in this business for now about 10 years and next to startups and research centers, all the technologies we are talking about, they come from startups. They don't come from research centers. Until 5 years, we wouldn't talk about cultivated meat, and so how could we ask policymakers to invest in that? So
I'd push back a little bit though and say cultivated meat in the Netherlands spun out of a government grant and academic research. Most of meat exists because of public funding and sort of a vision around, is there something here to explore, bringing an academic consortia together. So it's a little bit of both, but we have one-off nodes in different parts of Europe, including in the Netherlands, and there needs to be more coherence and consistency in that.
Yeah, just to build on that, what we find when we talk to researchers and scientists is that there's a huge energy towards this. Like, people believe in it as a technology, like scientists believe in it, but they've had a really challenging time getting consistent funding because the belief hasn't been there from the agencies, like from the national levels, from the international level. It's been, oh, it's too risky of a technology, like it's not the preferred or pathway for sustainable food change. And that drive now, that academic community is coming together, and we're starting to see innovations coming out of that more often. I mean, they've been in there from the beginning. There have been some really champion scientists. This is the reason we're even here talking about it. But we do need, scientists need funding to do the work and to be consistently present in these in this space. We need consistent sources of funding from low TRL upwards, and it's not true that the innovations in this space are all going to come from startups. Like, a lot of it is going to require like low-tier or fundamental kind of research.
Yeah, but this is also the very good news, because we are here to state that. And your report also helps document the fact that there is a major opportunity that we just need to seize. In fact, this is the point here. How do we make it happen? So what would be, from what you've experienced in the CBE and BBI, how does it work? How do we turn nice ideas into efficient execution?
With yes, combination of vision, anticipation, volonté in French, will, and patience. So that's maybe the most problem of biotech or everything that concerns living organism. Life always escape of what we want to modeling it, and it's always surprise, and you have always not problems, but you have to not to be impatient and to be long-term and invest and develop. And that's also one of the enabling technology that could be a game changer. Just an anecdote which has nothing to do with food, but you will understand. 15 years ago, we were mandated by the French government to establish a possible cooperation between France and USA on biofuel. Right. And so we visit the US DOE research center on biofuel, and what struck me is that each research centers that focus on metabolic engineering, they were based in a research center of nuclear energy. Why? Because they have access to the supercalculator, and that was an enabling tool that could speed time and energy. And the game changer today is the development of computer, of artificial intelligence, of algorithm. That is a fantastic enabling tool to try to develop, to save time and energy. So that was not possible 15 years ago in many of possible applications, like food, like what we call now fermentation precision, precision fermentation, is now possible because of this game changer. And be sure that when we'll have quantum computers, it will be a new game changer that make a progress more than linear. And that's why I think that it is the right timing to really invest about the promise of biotechnology to food ingredients, even if it is the historical use of biotech by humanity, as Paul remained 13,000 years ago. Without biotech, we'll have no human civilization, no bread, no beer, of course, no cheese. So not be able to use of milk because of lactose intolerance and so on. So it's after 30,000 years of patience, now we have the tool to really take advantage about all this genetic information that is in the living organism, and we know about nothing about it, to have new functionality towards sustainable solution.
Yeah, and what you've proved also through BBI and CBE is that it works. We can turn technology into industries.
Yes, that does not work on every application, of course. It's useless to force microorganisms to produce non-functional molecule like alkane to do fuels. It's against the thermodynamical principle. And but if to produce functionalized molecules, yes, it is a very efficient tool. And what is more functionalized than the fatty acid and especially proteins? That's try to manufacture protein with only with chemical pathway. Good luck.
From your perspective, Robert, and from the perspective of the startup that you represent, how many startups do you have in your association?
21.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what are the key priorities from the perspective of those emerging businesses?
Well, first and foremost, right now is protecting the regulatory pathway in Europe, because there's been threats to it from all sorts of directions. So very focused on, as I said earlier, reframing our value proposition, speaking to folks about why the novel foods law should be left alone, let it do its thing, how these products can come to market in a perfectly safe way, and how they can contribute to goals like competitiveness and autonomy. But at a more startup level, obviously we all have real challenges in scaling that we need capital for, and early phase investment from VC was great, but it's not fit for purpose for the long-term growth that we need. We have a CapEx that we need to fill that is really probably only going to be filled by a massive infusion of public investment in the space. And that comes back to the policy coherence and really talking to policymakers about what we offer and why we need to be in statute, why we need to be included in the Biotech Act and Sustainable Food Systems Framework, so that there is a justification for that large infusion of capital that needs to come our way in the coming decade. And let me just say, carry on something he said. I think sometimes we all do this for a living and we get caught up in, and I was just listening to him, this is a really big deal. I mean, we're talking about the fourth revolution of agriculture. We're talking about moving to the next level of domesticating cells and microbes to make food for us. And sometimes we get caught up in not really talking about what a big deal this is. Instead of communicating to European policymakers and stakeholders, the fourth revolution of agriculture should really be centered here in Europe.
Yeah, because we are talking about technologies that can succeed in reducing the impact by 90%, which is just unbelievable, and we wouldn't have been able to discuss it even 10 years ago. So the order of magnitude is massive, and it will require a lot of money, but we can do it.
Yes, I would say, of course, I will not contradict you. Yes, we can do it, but provided that Europe and Europe community realize the opportunity now, that it's time, because we are not the only one realizing it. USA have been realized it a couple of years before. China is realizing it's a race, and it's based on our experience on the previous public-private partnership, where we are more focused on chemical is material, but the issue is the same. Domesticate the living, the life, in a sustainable and efficient way. It's always risky. It's always risky to develop new solutions. So that's why we need a de-risking tool to reduce time to market. So we need public authority to help the pioneer to take risk in Europe, not in US, please. And that you must co-finance the one who take risk. We must have infrastructure. Or open innovation center using with existing facility to try new solution, to de-risk without losing too much time and money. And so provided that Europe realize this fantastic opportunity, yes, it will be a fantastic opportunity for us.
Because Stella, it's a geopolitical topic.
Yeah, and I mean, we know the same as what you say, Christophe, that the interest is not just from Europe. You know, there is, if we talk about biotechnology legislation, the US has enshrined alternative proteins or biotech for food in recent policy developments there. The same goes in China. Like, these are not unique thoughts that Europe is having alone, but we do have the advantage that Europe has is this concentration of scientific and industrial capacity. Like we really have the expertise. It's just going to move offshore if we don't have a cohesive strategy about how to keep it on. And what I've seen when we look at funding, the current landscape is there's a few really pioneering funders that are trying to fund the whole value chain from the whole TRL levels from the early to the late. You know, you have Business Finland and you have BPI France, both of which that do this first factory kind of funding, that have funded some startups that span out from universities through to their first building in Europe. And that's what we need. We need more of that, but on a European level.
Yeah, because as you were saying also, Robert, those technologies, most of them come out of Europe.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no reason that we shouldn't, be at least an innovation hub. It's the center of gravity will move away from us if we don't capture it. I'm not ready to be negative. I'm still positive about our opportunity, but I can see it starting to slip away. And I'll just give you an anecdote. I mean, in our trade association, Cellular Agriculture Europe, I've lost 4 members in the last 9 months. Because they've decided not to focus on Europe anymore. The novel foods law is too slow, complex, the politics have gotten dicey here, and the U.S. looks like a much attractive environment right now. So we're seeing it. We're seeing that some startups are starting to think about leaving and recentering themselves elsewhere, and that's a real shame.
And can you tell us a bit about what happened in Netherlands? Why did the Dutch government start supporting these initiatives?
Well, I think it's a really unique food ecosystem, first of all. I mean, top tier university in the world on food and agriculture, always been innovative in order to utilize a very small piece of land in order to be the second largest exporter of agricultural products in the world behind the United States, which is shocking considering the size of the country. So there's always been an innovation ecosystem there. And cultivated meat is largely considered to been born there. But of more recent, the Dutch government have committed 60 million euro towards building a cellular agriculture ecosystem in the Netherlands that encompasses both precision fermentation and cultivated meat. There's now PhD programs and master's programs going online at the 3 largest universities. There's announcements about to be made in open access scale-up facilities for these two technologies. So they are, it's a start. 60 million is not a lot, but it's more than any other government has put in this space so far, dedicated on this technology. I think the Netherlands will continue to be a leader in this space, even if Europe decides to let go of the larger package.
I just wanted to add to that example, the example of the UK, which we've seen in the last 3 to 4 years, has really ramped up the amount of investment into trying to build the same kinds of hubs where you have a link between university facilities, like facilities like pilot facilities, or like small grade spaces where industry can come and really test, and bringing together that expertise and the policy environment following that. Like, as soon as you see that there is an economic and scientific base there in the country, we've seen the policy really switch, and now the UK has followed some of those other countries we mentioned in having cultivated meat enshrined as a key technology as part of the engineering biology strategy.
Yeah, and thankfully the UK has some flexibility to move away from the novel foods law as well, and create, optimize that process and create a little bit more flexibility in the speed of approvals. And it's going to make the UK one of those innovation hubs in the world, I think.
Yeah, and we can also mention the fact that recently, last year, the Horizon provided 2 calls around cellular agriculture and novel foods that were very unique, and for which you are part of.
Yeah, we're part of one of the calls that exists right now called Giant Leaps. I know there's a number of people in the audience and yourself that are part of the other one, Feast. It's their Horizon has been a great tool to use to advance knowledge and cooperation in this space. And I'd like to see more. There's a lot of opportunity there in order to advance and answer some of the fundamental questions that stakeholders have about these technologies that they're concerned about. That's a tool that can be used to answer those questions.
Yeah, because this is exactly the purpose of those 2 calls, which is impact assessment of cellular agriculture, and the other is impact assessment of novel foods. And for those 2 calls, also EIT is part of it. So it's a very, very positive move in which we are going, and we hope that for the coming years we will go much faster. So what would we need to go faster?
You're looking at me. I think we should be, at this point, thinking about a really big, major effort to build a public-private partnership which covers, the research through to the innovation, and I think that the time is right for that. Like, we have had that initial investment. There's been some really impactful Horizon projects that have built a lot of hubs building up in different research institutes across Europe that I think And we know that there's sort of interest from conventional industry as well as from various governments that have championed this, like the Netherlands and Denmark as well. I think there's a question of pulling those people together now and building the energy behind it.
Yes, I do agree. It's time and it's possible. I'll give you one small anecdote. The advantage to be old is to have a lot of small anecdotes like that. I think it was in early 2012. I was invited to join a working group with, on the umbrella of the World Economic Forum. It was a 3B working group, biomass, biotech, biofuel. At that time, it was only biofuel in North America, in USA. So I was the only European. I listened, speak with the other. Very interesting. We spoke about challenge and so on. And learned that there was a similar working group in China and another in India. So I candidly asked why there is nothing in Europe. And I was answered because our stakeholders told us that Europe is the last continent for bioeconomy, for biotech. It was early 2012. Of course, I didn't mention that we were preparing. It was the first weeks of the future public-private partnership named BBI. And so in early 2014, we set up this partnership, a 3.7 billion euro partnership on bioeconomy, not only in biotech. And recently, last year, I met someone from the US government that it was a lady, I forgot her name, sorry, the mother of the Biotech Act, or the Biden Act, the Biotech. And she explained that her model was BBI. So in 10 years, we become from a lost continent to the world model about the success to make it happen.
Yeah, in fact, because we shall not forget that BBI was much before the bold goals in the US or any other biotech initiative in other countries. But the good news also, and we can start unveiling a little bit about this, is that EIT Food will come in the coming weeks with initiative on the matter. So let's be prepared, because in few weeks you will see how, beyond what has already been initiated through the different Horizon project to which EIT is participating, as of next year, a much bigger initiative will be supported by EIT Food in order to prepare the path for this fantastic potential that we see lying ahead and that we just need to seize. So be prepared. You will be informed and invited also to join this initiative, which shall bring together all the stakeholders that are needed to make it happen. I mean, the corporations, the research centers, the startups, and also the funding bodies. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you to our panelists for all your insights, and let's meet in few weeks to tell you more about what will happen.
One thing that I didn't tell you about the headsets is that you can regulate the volume. You may have figured it out yourself, but you have to touch one of the sides of them, and then you kind of see a button rolling, and this can get you the volume going up. So this is probably will not be very relevant for too long, because we will delve into basically the last panel session of the track 3. And then afterwards we'll have a closing ceremony and a cocktail will follow. So I do encourage you to stay on the fair and resilient food system track, or just to stay with any track. We did speak about, we will now speak about measuring and influencing policy acceptance. And this will close our fair and resilient food systems track, as I said. We will have one moderator and one speaker, I think. A professor of marketing at Aarhus University and director of the EIT Food Consumer Observatory, Klaus Grunert, will be with us. Head of Insights at Consumer Observatory, Dirk Bosma, will join him on stage. So I just need a moment to see if people are ready, and we're going to kick off any moment now. For policies to be effective in changing behavior, a certain level of acceptance by those affected is essential. So policymakers need to understand how citizens feel about new policies and to what extent they can accept them. Learning the reasons behind why a policy is accepted or not accepted is fundamental for effective policymaking and communication. But how do we do that? Drawing on decades of research, experience in the commercial world, and based on a solid scientific framework, EIT Foods Consumer Observatory is developing a policy acceptance measurement tool. So we will now get to present the findings of a recent pilot study on meat advertisement ban. The speakers will also unveil the plan for the development of the Universal Policy Acceptance Measurement Tool. So, measuring and influencing policy acceptance. Let's welcome Klaus and Dirk on stage with a big round of applause. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And can you hear me? Yeah, thank you very much. Can I hear myself now? Well, it's a little bit better. Okay. Anyway, thanks for coming to this almost final session here. Dirk and myself, some of you already know, we are from the Consumer Observatory. So we work with generating consumer insights. And normally when we talk about generating consumer insights with regard to the food area in a broader sense, we are interested in whether consumers accept food products and whether consumers accept people bringing food products on the market, companies and that type of thing. But now here we're talking about something different. Basically what we want to do in the session here, we want to promote an idea that we think could be very useful in the food context, namely also investigating whether people will accept a policy that is potentially in the making. We know all that the green transition in the food sector is also a question about policies and about regulations. Regulations about which products can come on the market, regulations about how these products can be marketed, the labeling issue, things about taxation. There are many issues that are policy related here. And the point we want to make is there could be an idea of investigating whether people think a certain policy will be a good idea. And why is that a good idea? Why is that a good idea to investigate policy acceptance? If people think that a policy is a good policy, it will be easier for that policy to actually be implemented. Compliance with the policy will be easier. If people think a policy is not a good idea, there will be resistance. It will be much more difficult to implement the policy in an effective way. So if there is some acceptance of the policy in the public, there will be more compliance and there will be more continuity. And that is one of the reasons why we think doing that is a good idea. And our thinking is not least influenced what one does in the private sector, because in a company that wants to bring new food products on the market, they do a lot in order to make sure once a product comes on the market, it will actually be accepted by consumers. They have a process where they screen ideas, test concept ideas with consumers, test prototypes of the products with consumers, do a lot of things to make sure that before the product comes on the market, it's fine-tuned in such a way that it will be a success. And in a way, we think we could do something similar with policy. That by having the right kind of insights about how the policy is and will be perceived, we can fine-tune the policy so that it will be better, that it will become better in actually achieving the goal it's supposed to achieve when it is finally being implemented. And in order to do that, we will use this model here, and it's not something that we have invented. It builds on a stream of literature that exists on policy acceptance, and it basically says that we have three components that are of importance with regard to policy acceptance. First of all, do people think there is actually a problem to be solved? If somebody believes climate change is a hoax, that person will not have a lot of understanding for any policy that is aimed to do something about that. But if people think that is an urgent problem, there will also be more acceptance for the policy. Then we have the perception of the political institution formulating and implementing the policy. Is that institution regarded as an institution that is competent to actually formulate that policy and make it work when it is being implemented? Is that institution being regarded as transparent with regard to what they are doing? Is that institution regarded as an institution that will make sure that the policy is fair and takes into account the interests of all the different groups involved and affected by the policy? And then, of course, finally, we have the perception of the policy itself. Does the public think that the policy actually will be able to achieve its goal? So we have these three components, and they are embedded in a lot of context factors that may be cultural, that may be previous experiences, media, the political preferences that people have, all will have an impact on these factors and could be taken into account when analyzing policy acceptance and determinants of policy acceptance. And Dirk has some case studies that he will present now with regard to how this framework can be applied to policy acceptance.
Yes, thank you. No, I don't need the microphone. I'm mic'd up. Yeah, it was February this year when we were talking to the public affairs team of EIT Food, and obviously they are the part of EIT Food that talks to policymakers, and one of the topics of that discussion was their frustration that there was always a lot of talk about whether or not consumers would want something, but they could never actually prove it if consumers actually wanted something. And at that time, we were already working on the specific model, and we realized, okay, we can help EIT Food and the public affairs team, but also other policymakers in measuring consumer acceptance or citizen acceptance of policies before a policy has even been communicated about. And if you know how to communicate the right things about the policy, you can increase policy acceptance. So we did a number of things. We came across this model, which is really an elegant, simple model that basically just describes what you should measure in order to measure policy acceptance. And before that, so before we had the model, we had already done a study on a specific policy that was being implemented in the Netherlands. And that study was about a sugar tax on drinks. And we thought that that tax, the way it was positioned, the way it was communicated, was a bit strange, and we thought, oh, it will probably not be very successful if it's done this way. So we proactively did a study on how the Dutch consumers thought about this policy. And as we were working on this model, we looked back on this specific study and see if all of the elements of the models were represented in that study. So the policy we investigated was an increase on the price of drinks. It was a flat rate increase, so all drinks, regardless of their sugar content, were taxed higher. And there were only 3 exceptions. That was bottled water, that was alcoholic drinks, and that was dairy drinks. And that was a bit weird because dairy drinks tend to have lots of sugar. If you like chocolate milk, you will probably know that there's lots of sugar in it. And also, the policy was not very well communicated, and we didn't. It took quite some effort to try to understand what exactly the goal of this policy was. So we asked Dutch consumers, what do you think about this policy? And we later applied this to the model. One of the things, perception of the problem, and here we learned that it's very important to be very clear about the problem that you're trying to solve. Is it sugar intake? Is that a problem you're trying to solve? Is it obesity that you're trying to solve, or is it all of the health issues that are associated with sugar intake? You may have heard Tim Spector speaking about just how bad sugar for us is. It wasn't really clear what the problem the tax was trying to solve, and we found out that it's very important. I'll come back to that later, to be very clear about the goals of a policy. We didn't specifically ask about the perception of the political institution, which is, in this case is the Dutch government, but the participants in our study, they actually mentioned this spontaneously, and they mentioned 2 things. First of all, there were doubts about the competence of the Dutch governments to influence our diets, not even setting or communicating about what a proper diet is, but let alone influencing it. But another thing, there were doubts about the intentions that the government has with this tax. This is what they were saying. Disputing the fairness because the underlying motivation seems to be aimed at generating extra income. So the government applies this tax not to improve the health of the citizens, but to generate extra income. And you can understand that this kind of distrust does not really help in accepting the policy. And then lastly, the policy itself. There's a number of elements that we investigated. One of them was effectiveness. Is it, after all, it was a relatively small increase. Will this be effective in changing behavior? The answer is, in the perception of our participants, the answer is no. No, it's going to be very difficult. It's more symbolic because they see sugar as something that is addictive. And I've underlined one word here. It won't keep them off that. And this has to do with the goals of the policy. Because if the goal of the policy is to reduce obesity, that is very polarizing. Because then there is the people who don't have an issue with weight, with people that do have an issue with weight. And the people who don't have weight issues, they feel that they are being treated unfairly because other people are unable to reduce their sugar intake. They have to pay more for their Coke because other people drink too much Coke. It's overweight people in particular to take less sugar. The non-overweight group will be disadvantaged by that. So it's not entirely fair. So there were questions about the fairness of this policy. Another point of fairness that was mentioned is that there are people who don't have a lot of money, and they are taxed the same amount of money as people who have a lot of money. So it's unfair to those who have little money to spend on their groceries. So, summarizing, there is a problem. People do recognize that. There are doubts about the political institution that implements this policy. There are doubts about the effectiveness and the fairness. And you can imagine, based on these outcomes, that there's not a lot of acceptance for this policy. So we've scheduled it like this. There are, let's say, 3 zones. There is the non-acceptance zones, there is the acceptance zone, and there is the tolerance zone. In this case, most of the consumers are on this side, non-acceptance. And non-acceptance leads to resistance. That can be active resistance, that can be complaining on social media, but it can also be voting. Voting for parties that do not support this, this tax. So that was, in hindsight, we could really apply the model to this, this study. And then we set up a new study, which was, for which we had to pick a policy, and we wanted a policy that was not too controversial, and also a policy that citizens from all over Europe could relate to. So we picked a policy where the local government, the municipality who exploits billboards, they said, we're not going to use our billboards to promote industries that have a high climate impact. So not meat, not not factory farmed meat, not airlines, etc., etc. So it's part of a bigger scheme of not promoting things that are bad for the environment. So it's local. It's only for factory farmed meat. So local organic meat producers are not affected. It's only for billboards owned by the municipality. So there's plenty of other billboards that are not owned by the municipalities. It doesn't apply to that. And it's not just meat, it's other polluting industry. So this is what we presented to the consumers and asked for their opinion in a structured way using this model. In general, most of the consumers were somewhere in this zone. Most of them were like in the middle. They were like, yeah, it doesn't really, it won't help much, but you know, it won't harm either. Some of them were really on board with it, so they were in the active acceptance. But what was most interesting was that there were some people that really did not accept it, and some people that were like really on the far end of this scale. And if the model really works, we can predict based where people are based on the elements of the model. So that's what we did. Once again, I'm going to show you how they felt about all of the elements of the model. So first of all, the problem. Is meat a problem? If I ask the people around here, you would usually probably say, yes, meat is a problem, and it is a cause for climate change. If you ask people on the street, they are not convinced it is. Some of them are, but most consumers do not see a direct relationship between factory farmed meat and climate change. So it is kind of a problem. They have some idea that it might not really be good, but it's not really a big problem. But if the municipality is willing to do something about it, then that's fine. It's not a cause of climate change, but it's the way we keep animals that is more or less the general perception of this. And then the municipality. The people have quite high, and quite a good positive image of their local municipality. They do a lot of things for the citizen that are very tangible, and they also see, let's say, climate initiatives for local citizens. Trash, garbage is obviously a very clear one, and in general, we got positive feedback about the municipality trying to do something about climate change. But where there was doubts is, okay, but how do they do it? And who's going to make a decision if a certain campaign is allowed or not? How does that work? Does the municipality have the right people to make those decisions? And what will the procedure look like? So there we found some, let's say, doubts. And in the model, it mentions trust. And as you may know, EIT Food has been measuring trust for the last 7 years. So we know what a trusted party is. And there's 3 elements of trust: care, competence, transparency. All of these elements we found in this particular model that we can use to explain whether or not consumers trust the government to implement this particular policy. Then the perception of the policy itself. And here, once again, we looked at effectiveness and we looked at fairness. Now, effectiveness, we got some concerns. So will this really make a difference? No, not really. It's better than nothing, but it won't really make a difference. And fairness relates to, okay, who's responsible for the problem and who should pay the price for solving it. And here, the meat industry is seen as the culprit. They are the ones who pay the burden for this, so that's fine. The only unfairness here is that it's the small, local, organic farmers. They're not seen as causing climate change, but it wasn't 100% clear that they were an exception for the policy. So there's a communication issue. So our conclusion was that we can predict policy acceptance based on the things that we measure in this model. So it's a good and it's a useful model for determining whether consumers will accept a certain policy or not. But there is, I forgot about this one, there is also a small group that does not think it is fair. They are very protective of their food choices, and they don't want any government to interfere with their food choices. They don't want to be limited in their food choices. And this is another recommendation. You need to make it very clear that these people will still have all the food choices in the world, that the government is not interfering with food choices. They are interfering with, let's say, the marketing opportunities of polluting industries. Here, it's an attack on citizens' freedom. That's a pretty strong statement by this person. So in general, it works. We get very positive or very useful feedback if we measure this policy. Now, in this case, it wasn't, the policy was already implemented in a number of cities, and we did not do this to support a specific policy that was about to be implemented. But suppose we had done this study before a municipality introduced this policy, we had some pretty useful findings and some pretty good advice for these policymakers. First of all, the meat industry is not seen as the polluter that it is. If you want more acceptance for this policy, increase urgency by highlighting the environmental impact of the meat industry. That will give people more reasons to support this policy. Second, there were some doubts about whether banning ads from these billboards would actually be effective. and there are, let's say there is data, there is expected effects, there is, we know what to expect, and that can be used to explain how effective this policy will be. Third, how does the municipality make decisions about what is acceptable or not? That needs guidelines, that needs transparent guidelines. So how does it work, who will do it, why, and what does the municipality do to make sure that they have the, let's say, the capacity to make these decisions. Make it very clear that the policy does not affect the small-scale local farmers. It does not affect local businesses. It is really aimed at the big, the big meat industry. That will. It was already in the policy, but apparently it wasn't clear enough that this was an exception. And lastly, it doesn't restrict personal food choice. The government doesn't want to interfere with your personal food choices. It aims to reduce CO2 emissions, which is something that we all benefit from. And it's aimed at polluting industry, not at reducing personal freedom. So this will increase the perception of fairness of the policy. And then we look back at our model and see, okay, does it work? Is it optimized? And yes, we can accept, we can predict acceptance of the policy. Is there a problem? Is there a problem that we can and should address? That is important. The urgency, do consumers see it? Effectiveness is important. So is this something that will actually help solve the problem? And fairness. Is it something that is fair to anybody involved? So does the burden lie with those who cause the problem? And then you may think, where is the trust? Where is the trust in the authority that's implementing this? Well, we realized that was something that influences all of these elements. So we decided to take it out of the model and put it as a factor that influences all of these. And thing with trust in an authority, you can't really change that in the short term. So the other things can be changed, for instance, by adding things to the policy or better communicating about it. Trust is not something you can change in the short term. So it's not really necessary to measure that because it's very difficult to influence that. And that brings us back to Klaus explaining what our next plans are.
Yeah. So as you have seen, Dirk has been doing some pilots on this, see whether the model makes sense and gives some interesting results. And I think the answer is yes. What we will do in the next phase then is that we want to do some more pilots with different types of policies that differ in their intrusiveness, differ in the authorities involved and also in the target audiences affected. And not least, we want to do some quantitative pilots because then we can also quantify the different groups that Dirk has mentioned, those that are very much for, very much against, those that are in between, how they differ, and what one could do in order to increase policy acceptance. And in order to do these additional pilots, we would be very interested to have some cooperation. If there's anybody here who works in the policy area who would be interested in trying out whether any particular policy, how it would be accepted by people before it's actually being implemented. So please, in that case, get into touch with us. We'll be delighted to work together with you and get some more real-world examples. And as always, we have a QR code there. And then I would like to ask Luisa Heinreich to join us on the stage here. She is a senior advisor in EIT Food for policy. And please, you have some comments on the usefulness of this approach that we are promoting here.
Thank you, Klaus, and thank you, Dirk, as well, for inviting me on stage to share some of the more high-level reflections on the work that you've done. So I guess understanding public acceptance of policies requires robust measurement tools. And the work that you've started doing with the IT Foods Consumer Observatory is a significant step in the right direction, creating such tools and helping to align public sentiment with policy objectives and policy goals. So you also alluded to this already. Why does public acceptance actually matter? So households account for approximately 75% of greenhouse gas emissions due to consumption behavior. And research shows that lifestyle changes alongside renewable energy adoption, agricultural shifts and lab-grown meat could reduce energy demand by 40%. While, however, behavior change holds enormous potential to help meet the Paris Agreement targets, it remains under-prioritized in current climate policies, which focus more on technology and also market mechanisms. Policy interventions can influence behavior and behavior change through regulations, that's what we heard, infrastructure, market mechanisms, and public campaigns. And the best interventions are those that focus on changing mindsets and contexts. So what are actually the factors that drive policy acceptance? And we heard this already. So there are several factors influencing whether citizens will accept policy interventions. One, I guess that's the biggest one, is problem awareness. Really understanding the issue at stake is crucial. Then the second one, context and boundary conditions. So social and cultural contexts really affect acceptance. Then, again, we heard this, perceived effectiveness, transparency and fairness. So policies must be seen as impactful and fair. Then another point is perceived behavioral control. So when individuals actually feel they have less personal control, they are more supportive of government interventions. Then, what also Klaus was mentioning is agency and trust in government. The awareness of one's own agency and the sphere of influence and trust in government agents is essential for policy acceptance. Then, values and identity. These play a key role also in building public engagement. Then, I guess you heard this in other panels as well, communication. So messaging should really emphasize the gains from sustainable behavior rather than focusing on what is lost. And lastly, invoking citizenship over consumerism. So really framing individuals as citizens rather than consumers encourages more responsible behavior. What is the implications for policymakers? So as I said, the best interventions are those that focus on both changing mindsets and contexts. To achieve this, policymakers must integrate public opinion research, behavioral science, and effective communication strategies into policy design. Achieving this transformation, I would say, requires cultural shifts within public institutions, along with new methods, processes, and a willingness to embrace risk and uncertainties. There is a couple of new skills, capabilities, competencies for anticipatory governance that would need to be developed. So policymakers need new skills to navigate the complexities of this effective anticipatory governance. They would need to be trained in strategic foresight, the ability to leverage forward-looking data and trends. They would need to work more on or with behavioral science, understanding how policies influence individual and group behaviors. Empathy and emotional intelligence is super important, so aligning policies with societal values. Then communication, storytelling, narratives, and public engagement, communicating efficacy, what is to be gained, and highlighting the co-benefits as well. Critical thinking and problem solving, addressing challenges creatively and adapting policies accordingly. The courage to experiment and learn. That's not always easy when you have a lot of lawyers working in administrations. So there's a call for more designers in public administration. Policy research and design. So basing policies on solid empirical research. Lastly, and that's also been said already, public care. So balancing diverse perspectives and interests, modeling and nurturing a culture of care, creating inclusive, dynamic spaces to also have difficult conversations. And lastly, ethical considerations, ensuring policies are fair, equitable, and mindful of societal impacts. So by developing these capacities, policymakers can craft more responsive, inclusive, and evidence-based policies that are more likely to gain public support and deliver longer-term impact and success. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Louisa, for this comprehensive overview on factors that would be need to take into account when working further on with such a policy acceptance rule. So thanks a lot. We are 1 minute and 30 seconds over time already, but we started a little bit late, so I dare ask, is there one urgent question from the audience that we should take? That is not the case. Well, then thanks a lot for being here. We'll keep you informed on what we are doing, and back to you.